Hey everyone, welcome to Between the Episodes. I hope you're all doing well. Today I want to argue that Dexter Morgan is not the empty, emotionless monster he spends 8 seasons claiming to be. Instead, I believe that Dexter is a deeply traumatized human being whose psychology was shattered before he was old enough to remember it, and that everything we watch him do across the entire series, the killing, the rituals, the mask he wears every single day, the relationships he builds and destroys. All of it is the behavior of a man desperately trying to fill a void that was carved into him the moment he watched his mother die in a shipping container at the age of 2. The show gives us 3 psychological pillars that prove this. First, the childhood trauma and the code that Harry Morgan built on top of it, which did not heal Dexter, but instead locked him into a life of controlled destruction. Second, the dark passenger, which starts as an external force Dexter blames for his urges, but slowly reveals itself to be nothing more than Dexter himself, hiding behind a story he invented to avoid responsibility. And third, the emotional evolution that unfolds across every season. The grief, the loyalty, the love he cannot name, all of which prove that the man who insists he feels nothing has been feeling something all along. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free, and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. Section 1. Born in Blood. The shipping container trauma. To understand Dexter Morgan, you have to start at the very beginning. Not the beginning of his killing, not the beginning of his double life in Miami. You have to go back to when he was just a little boy, barely old enough to form memories, sitting in something no child should ever have to see. Dexter Morgan was not born a killer. That is one of the most important things to understand about his character. He was born Dexter Moser, the younger son of a woman named Laura Moser. Laura was involved in the drug world, but she was also working as a confidential informant for a Miami police officer named Harry Morgan. She was feeding Harry information from the inside, helping him build cases against dangerous people. But that arrangement came with a price. The people Laura was informing on eventually found out what she was doing. And when they did, they decided to make an example out of her. When Dexter was around 2 to 3 years old, he and his older brother Brian were with their mother inside a shipping container. What happened next would become the single most important event in Dexter's entire psychological history. A drug dealer named Santos Jimenez, along with 2 other men acting under the orders of a man named Hector Estrada, murdered Laura Moser right in front of her 2 sons. They did not use a gun. They did not use a knife. They used a chainsaw. Laura and several other people were killed inside that container in an act of extreme violence. And Dexter and Brian were left sitting in the aftermath. Now here is the detail that changes everything. Dexter and Brian were not rescued right away. They sat in that shipping container, surrounded by their mother's blood and the blood of the other victims, for 2 full days. 2 days. A toddler sitting in a pool of his own mother's blood, in the dark, with no one coming. Try to imagine what that does to a developing brain. Try to imagine what that does to a child who does not yet have the ability to process language properly, let alone make sense of death and violence on that scale. He could not understand what had happened. He could not call for help. He could not leave. He just sat there, soaking in it, for 48 hours. Officer Harry Morgan was the one who eventually found the boys. He opened that container and saw 2 small children covered in blood. And here is where the story splits in a way that becomes crucial later in the series. Harry picked up Dexter and carried him out, but he left Brian behind. Harry saw something in Brian's eyes that made him believe Brian had already been permanently damaged by what he had witnessed. So Harry took Dexter home and adopted him into his family, raising him alongside his biological daughter, Deborah. Brian was left to the child welfare system, bouncing through foster homes and institutions with no one to guide him, no one to care for him, and no one to help him process what he had seen. This one decision, made in a single moment inside a blood-soaked shipping container, created two completely different paths. Dexter got a father, a home, a sister, and eventually a code to live by. Brian got nothing, and both of them grew up to be killers. But we will get to Brian later. For now, let us focus on what that trauma actually did to Dexter's mind. When a child experiences something that violent and that overwhelming at such a young age, their brain does not have the tools to deal with it. Adults who go through terrible events can sometimes talk about what happened, seek help, lean on their understanding of the world to slowly make sense of things. A 2-year-old cannot do any of that. Their brain is still in the earliest stages of development. The parts of the brain that handle emotions, that help us connect with other people, that allow us to feel safe in the world, those parts are still being built. And when something that horrific interrupts that building process, the damage can be deep and lasting. Think of it like this. Imagine you are building a house, and you have just started laying the foundation. The concrete is still wet, and then someone drives a truck through the middle of it. You can still build a house on that foundation, but it will never be quite right. There will always be cracks. There will always be weak spots. And no matter how carefully you build everything on top of it, those cracks will show up in unexpected places for the rest of that house's life. That is what happened to Dexter. The foundation of his emotional development was shattered before it ever had a chance to set. And the result was a boy who grew up feeling fundamentally different from everyone around him. A boy who described himself as hollow inside. A boy who could not understand why other people cried at sad movies, or got excited about birthdays, or felt the warmth of a hug. He did not feel those things the way other people did, and he knew it. Even as a child, he knew something was wrong with him. Something was missing, and he could not figure out what it was. The show makes it very clear that Dexter's emotional numbness is a direct result of what happened in that container. This is not something he was born with. This is something that was done to him. The violence he witnessed, the blood he sat in, the days of abandonment in the dark, all of it combined to essentially shut down his ability to process emotions the way a normal person would. His brain, in a desperate attempt to survive something it could not handle, simply turned the volume down on feelings. Way down. Almost to zero. And here is where things get even more complicated, because along with that emotional numbness came something else. Urges. Dark urges. As Dexter grew older, Harry noticed that his adopted son had started killing animals and burying them in the yard. This was not normal childhood curiosity about bugs or frogs. Dexter was hunting neighborhood pets and dismembering them with a level of focus and calm that deeply disturbed Harry. When Harry confronted young Dexter about it, he asked him a question that would define the rest of the series. He asked Dexter if he ever wanted to kill a person. And Dexter, with the flat honesty that would become his signature, said yes. Not anyone in particular, just yes. This is the moment Harry Morgan realized that his adopted son was not just a traumatized child who needed therapy. In Harry's mind, Dexter was something more dangerous, something that could not be fixed through traditional means. Whether Harry was right about that, whether professional help could have actually changed Dexter's path, is one of the biggest debates surrounding the show. But Harry was a cop, not a psychologist. He made the decision based on what he knew, what he feared, and what he believed was the only way to protect both Dexter and the world from what Dexter might become. The trauma in the shipping container did not just create emotional numbness. It created what Dexter would later call a need. Not a want, a need. The same way you need to eat when you are hungry, or sleep when you are exhausted. Dexter described his urge to kill as something physical, something biological, something that built up inside him like pressure in a pipe, until he had no choice but to release it. And when he did release it, when he finally gave in to that need, he felt a brief moment of relief, a brief moment of feeling alive. And then the pressure would start building again. The show is very deliberate about connecting this need back to the shipping container. Dexter did not develop these urges because he watched too many horror movies or because he had a bad day at school. He developed them because his brain was permanently altered by an experience so extreme that most adults would not survive it with their minds intact, let alone a toddler. The blood, the death, the absolute helplessness of being trapped in that container. It all got wired into his developing brain in a way that could never be fully unwired. There is a moment later in the series that makes this connection painfully clear. When Arthur Mitchell, the Trinity Killer, murders Dexter's wife Rita in the season 4 finale, Dexter comes home to find his infant son Harrison sitting on the bathroom floor, crying, covered in his mother's blood. Rita is dead in the bathtub, and Dexter, standing in that doorway, sees his own origin story playing out all over again. His son, just like him, born in blood, sitting in it, helpless, alone. It is one of the most devastating moments in the entire series, because Dexter understands, better than anyone on Earth, exactly what that moment might do to Harrison's mind. He knows, because it is what made him who he is. And the show does not let that parallel go. In Dexter New Blood, set years later, we learn that Harrison has indeed developed dark urges of his own. He carries a straight razor, the same kind of blade the Trinity Killer used to kill his mother. He has violent impulses. He has killed. The cycle that began in a shipping container decades ago has repeated itself, passed from father to son, not through genetics alone, but through the terrible inheritance of trauma. This is what makes Dexter Morgan such a fascinating character from a psychological standpoint. He is not evil in the way we typically think of evil. He is not someone who woke up one day and chose to be a monster. He is someone who had monstrousness forced upon him before he was old enough to tie his own shoes. Every kill he makes, every dark urge he struggles with, every moment of emotional emptiness he experiences, it all traces back to that container, to those 2 days in the dark, to the blood of his mother pooling around him while no one came. The show presents this origin story not as an excuse for what Dexter does, but as an explanation. There is a difference. An excuse would mean it is okay. An explanation means we understand how it happened. We understand the chain of cause and effect that turned a normal toddler into a man who would grow up to kill over 100 people. And understanding that chain is essential to understanding everything else about Dexter Morgan. Because every single psychological layer we will explore in this essay, every behavior, every relationship, every internal struggle, all of it starts right here, in this container, in this blood, in this moment of absolute destruction. Dexter himself, through his internal thoughts throughout the series, comes back to this event over and over again. It is the wound that never heals. It is the thing he cannot outrun. No matter how much distance he puts between himself and that moment, no matter how many years pass, no matter how many people he kills or relationships he builds or masks he wears, he is always, at his core, that little boy sitting in the dark, covered in blood, waiting for someone to come. And someone did come. Harry Morgan opened that container and carried Dexter out into the light. But the question the show keeps asking, from the very first episode to the very last, is whether Harry truly saved him, or whether he simply shaped the darkness into something more controlled, more hidden, more dangerous. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Because what Harry did next, the code he built, the rules he taught, the killer he trained, That is an entirely different layer of psychology, and one that raises questions just as disturbing as anything that happened inside that shipping container. Section 2. Harry Morgan and the Code. The man who built a killer. Harry Morgan is one of the most complicated characters in the entire Dexter series, and the reason he is so complicated is because you can never quite decide if he is a hero or a villain. On one hand, he saved a little boy from a shipping container filled with blood and death. He brought that boy into his home, gave him a family, gave him a name, gave him a life. On the other hand, he looked at that same little boy, and instead of getting him professional help, instead of taking him to someone who might be able to treat whatever was growing inside him, Harry decided to train him, to mold him, to turn him into something the world had never quite seen before. A serial killer with rules. To understand why Harry did what he did, you have to understand who Harry was. Harry Morgan was a homicide detective with the Miami Metro Police Department. He had spent his entire career surrounded by violence, by crime scenes, by the worst things human beings do to each other. He had also spent years watching guilty people walk free. Killers who got off on a technicality. Murderers whose lawyers found a loophole. Dangerous people who slipped through the cracks of a justice system that Harry had dedicated his life to serving. That frustration lived inside him, and it is important to keep that in mind, because when Harry looked at young Dexter and saw a potential killer, his mind did not go to therapy or medication. His mind went somewhere else entirely. Harry first realized something was seriously wrong with Dexter when he discovered the graves. Young Dexter had been killing animals, neighborhood dogs and cats, and burying them in the backyard. This was not a phase. This was not a boy being rough with a pet by accident. This was deliberate, focused, and repeated. Harry, with his background in homicide, recognized the pattern. He knew from his work that many serial killers start with animals before moving on to people. And when he asked Dexter directly whether he wanted to kill a person, and Dexter calmly said yes, Harry understood that his adopted son was on a path that would eventually lead to human victims. The question was not if, it was when. Now, a different father might have taken Dexter to a doctor, might have sought out a child psychologist who specialized in trauma, might have explored every possible option to redirect those urges through treatment. But Harry did not do that, and the show offers a few reasons why. First, Harry was afraid. He was afraid that if he brought Dexter to a professional, Dexter would end up locked away in an institution for the rest of his life. He had seen what happened to people who were labeled dangerous by the system. They disappeared behind walls and never came out. Harry could not bear the thought of that happening to his son. Second, Harry genuinely believed that Dexter's urges could not be stopped. He believed they were permanent, baked in, a part of who Dexter was now because of what had happened in that shipping container. And if they could not be stopped, then in Harry's mind, they had to be controlled. So Harry made a choice that would define everything. He decided to teach Dexter how to kill. But not just how to kill the right people, how to kill without getting caught, and how to use that unstoppable darkness for something that, at least in Harry's eyes, resembled good. This is what became known as the Code of Harry, and it is the single most important psychological structure in Dexter's entire life. The code was not written down on a piece of paper. It was not a formal document. It was a set of rules and lessons that Harry taught Dexter over the course of his childhood and teenage years, through conversations, through training, through real-world practice. And the code had several layers to it. The first and most important rule was simple: do not get caught. Above everything else, above the killing, above the morality, above everything, Dexter must never be discovered. Harry knew that if Dexter was caught, he would face life in prison or the death penalty. So rule number one was survival. Everything else was built on top of that foundation. To support that first rule, Harry taught Dexter a whole set of skills designed to keep him hidden. He taught him to blend in socially, to maintain what looked like a normal life. He taught him to fake emotions. When someone tells a joke, you laugh. When someone dies, you look sad. When someone takes your photo, you smile. It does not matter if you feel any of those things. You do them because that is what normal people do, and you need to look normal at all times. Harry even took teenage Dexter to a prison and showed him the execution of an inmate, making it very real and very clear what would happen if Dexter ever slipped up. The second major rule of the code was never kill an innocent person. This is the rule that separates Dexter from every other serial killer on the show, and arguably in television history. Dexter was only allowed to kill people who were themselves murderers. People who had taken a life and gotten away with it. People who had escaped the justice system and were free to kill again. Before Dexter could touch anyone, he had to be absolutely sure. He had to research them, investigate them, find proof that they were guilty. He could not act on a hunch. He could not act on a feeling. He needed evidence. The third rule built on the second. Dexter's victims had to be people who had been through the legal system and somehow slipped through. They had to be killers who the police knew about but could not convict. Or killers who had never been caught at all, but whose crimes Dexter could verify through his own investigation. Harry's code was not about Dexter playing judge and jury on just anyone he did not like. It was specifically about correcting the failures of the system Harry had spent his career inside of. And the final major principle was that killing had to serve a purpose. It could not be random. It could not be for fun alone. Every kill had to have a reason behind it. Every victim had to deserve it. This rule is what Harry used to justify the entire arrangement in his own mind. He told himself, and he told Dexter, that by following the code, Dexter was not just satisfying his urges, he was doing something useful. He was removing dangerous people from the world. He was, in a twisted way, saving lives. Now, here is where things get even more layered. For years, Dexter believed that Harry had come up with the code entirely on his own, that it was a father's desperate invention, born out of love and fear. But in Season 8 of the show, we learn the truth. Harry did not create the code alone. He had help from a woman named Dr. Evelyn Vogel. Vogel was a psychologist who specialized in studying people with violent tendencies. She was an expert in the field, and Harry had gone to her when he first realized what Dexter was becoming. Together, Harry and Vogel designed the code as a kind of experiment. Vogel brought the scientific thinking. She understood how people like Dexter operated, what drove them, what could channel their impulses. Harry brought the practical knowledge. He knew law enforcement. He knew how killers got caught. He knew the gaps in the system that Dexter could exploit. Between the two of them, they built a framework that would allow Dexter to kill regularly without ever being discovered, while also directing that killing toward people society would not miss. When Dexter finds out about Vogel's involvement, it shakes him. Because suddenly, the code is not just his father's love translated into rules. It is a clinical project, an experiment designed by a scientist. The morality that Dexter had clung to his entire life, the thing that made him believe he was different from other killers, that he was better than them, was partly constructed in a laboratory of ideas by a woman who viewed him as a fascinating case study. This reveal does not destroy Dexter, but it does crack something inside him. It makes him question whether the code was ever really about right and wrong, or whether it was always just about keeping him out of prison. And that question points to one of the most important things about Harry's influence on Dexter. Harry did not teach Dexter morality. Not really. He taught Dexter rules. And there is a huge difference between the two. Morality is something you feel inside. It is the voice in your head that tells you something is wrong, even when nobody is watching. Rules are external. They are instructions you follow because someone told you to, because there are consequences if you do not. Dexter follows the code not because he feels in his heart that killing innocent people is wrong. He follows it because Harry told him to, because the code is all he has. Without it, he is just another monster. This becomes painfully clear throughout the series whenever Dexter is tempted to break the code. When he is angry, when he is desperate, when someone threatens the people he cares about, the code bends. And sometimes it breaks. He kills people who do not fit the code's criteria. He lets personal emotions drive his choices, instead of the careful process Harry taught him. And every time he does, it proves that the code was always a leash, not a cure. It kept the dog from biting most of the time, but the dog was still a dog. The urge was still there. The darkness was still there. The code just pointed it in a specific direction. There is another part of Harry's legacy that deserves attention, and it is one of the saddest details in the entire show. Harry Morgan killed himself. After years of training Dexter, after building the code, after watching his son grow into exactly what he had shaped him to be, Harry walked in on Dexter dismembering a man named Juan Rhinus. And it broke him. Seeing what Dexter actually looked like in the middle of a kill, seeing the reality of the thing he had created, Harry could not live with it. 3 days later, he overdosed on his heart medication and died. His death was covered up as heart failure, but it was suicide. Think about what that means. The man who built the code, who believed it was the right thing to do, who spent years carefully crafting the system, who convinced himself it was the only way to save his son. That same man saw the end result of his work, and it killed him. Harry could handle the idea of Dexter killing. He could not handle the sight of it. The theory was clean. The reality was covered in blood and plastic. And yet, even after his death, Harry never really leaves Dexter. Throughout the entire series, Dexter has conversations with a version of Harry that exists inside his mind. This is not a ghost. This is not a hallucination in the medical sense. It is Dexter's way of imagining what Harry would say in any given situation. It is his internal voice of reason, externalized as the image of his father. When Dexter is about to make a dangerous choice, Harry appears and warns him. When Dexter feels lost, Harry appears and guides him. Harry is Dexter's conscience, or at least the closest thing Dexter has to one. And the fact that Dexter's conscience takes the form of the man who taught him to kill tells you everything you need to know about how deep Harry's influence goes. Harry Morgan loved his son. The show makes that clear. Everything he did, from the code to the training to the emotional lessons on how to fake a smile, all of it came from a place of wanting to protect Dexter. But love and wisdom are not the same thing. Harry loved Dexter enough to build him a cage, but he never considered that maybe, with the right help, Dexter might not have needed a cage at all. The code kept Dexter alive. The code kept Dexter out of prison. The code gave Dexter a sense of purpose and identity in a world where he otherwise felt like a complete outsider. But the code also locked Dexter into a life of killing from which he could never escape. It told him, from childhood, that this is what you are. This is what you will always be. You cannot change. You can only be managed. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And that message, that belief that he was permanently broken and could never be anything other than a killer with rules, created something inside Dexter that we have not talked about yet. Something he gave a name to. Something he carried with him every single day of his life, like a shadow he could never shake. He called it the dark passenger. And understanding what that really means is the key to understanding everything else about his mind. Section 3. The dark passenger. The voice inside the darkness. If you have ever watched even a single episode of Dexter, you have heard him use this phrase, the dark passenger. He says it in his internal thoughts. He says it out loud to the few people who know his secret. He uses it the way someone might talk about a disease they have been living with their entire life. Something that is part of them, but also separate from them. Something they did not choose, but cannot get rid of. The dark passenger is Dexter Morgan's name for his overwhelming, uncontrollable need to kill. And the way he talks about it, the way he relates to it, and the way his understanding of it changes over the course of the series tells us more about his psychology than almost anything else in the show. Dexter first mentioned the dark passenger to Harry when he was 12 years old. This was after Harry had already noticed the animal killings, after he had already started having serious conversations with Dexter about what was growing inside him. During one of these conversations, Harry made a remark about the shipping container. He said something along the lines of it getting into Dexter too early. He was talking about the trauma. He was talking about what Dexter had witnessed as a toddler and how it had changed him. But young Dexter heard something different. He interpreted Harry's words to mean that some kind of entity had entered him, something separate from himself, something that controlled him. And from that moment on, Dexter began thinking of his urges not as a part of who he was, but as a passenger, a dark one, riding along inside him, pulling strings, running the show. This is an incredibly important detail, because it reveals how Dexter's mind chose to cope with what was happening to him. He was a 12-year-old boy dealing with urges that terrified him. Urges to hurt people, to kill, to do things that he understood on some level were wrong. And rather than accept that these urges came from inside him, from his own damaged brain, from his own fractured emotions, he created a separation. He split himself in two. There was Dexter, the boy trying to be normal, trying to fit in, trying to do what Harry told him. And then there was the dark passenger, this other thing living inside him that wanted blood. By giving it a name and treating it as something separate, Dexter did not have to take full responsibility for what he did. It was not him killing those people. It was the dark passenger. He was just along for the ride. The show reinforces this idea constantly in the early seasons. Dexter's internal thoughts are filled with references to the dark passenger, as if it is a living thing. He talks about letting the dark passenger do the driving. He talks about feeding it. He talks about it growing restless when he is not killed in a while. He describes the buildup of his urge to kill as something physical, like a hunger or a thirst, something that rises in his body and takes over his thinking until he cannot focus on anything else. And when he finally gives in, when he finally puts someone on his table and goes through his ritual, he describes the relief as the dark passenger being satisfied, federal, quiet, at least for a while. In the early seasons, Dexter treats the dark passenger with a kind of respect, almost like a partnership. He knows it is dangerous. He knows it could destroy his life if he is not careful. But he also feels like he owes it something. After all, the dark passenger has been with him since childhood. It is the most consistent thing in his life. People come and go. Relationships start and end. But the dark passenger is always there. In a twisted way, it is the one companion Dexter has never been without. This relationship between Dexter and the dark passenger is what makes the character so fascinating to watch. Because he is not just a man who kills people. He is a man who has created an entire inner mythology to explain why he kills people. He has taken his trauma, his damage, his broken emotional wiring, and he has turned it into a story. A story where he is not the villain, where he is just a vessel for something bigger and darker than himself. And that story protects him. It keeps him sane, or at least his version of sane. Without it, he would have to face the full truth of what he is. And in the early seasons, that is something he is absolutely not ready to do. But as the series goes on, the dark passenger starts to become more complicated. And this is where the character development gets really interesting. In Season 2, Dexter's secret life nearly unravels when the bodies of his victims are discovered in the ocean off the coast of Miami. The press calls the unknown killer the Bay Harbor Butcher. And suddenly, Dexter is being hunted by his own colleagues. During this season, Dexter meets a woman named Lila Tournay at Narcotics Anonymous meetings. He is attending these meetings because Rita, his girlfriend at the time, found out he was keeping secrets and assumed he was a drug addict. Dexter went along with that assumption because it was easier than explaining the truth. But at these meetings, something unexpected happened. Lila described what it felt like to have a dark need rising up inside her, a compulsion she could not control. And Dexter was shaken because she was describing exactly what he felt. For the first time, someone was putting words to his experience in a way that connected his urge to kill with the language of addiction. This parallel between the dark passenger and addiction runs through the entire series. Dexter's urge to kill behaves exactly like an addiction in many ways. It builds over time. It becomes harder and harder to resist. When he gives in, there is a rush of relief and satisfaction. And then the cycle starts again. When he tries to stop killing, he experiences something that looks a lot like withdrawal. He becomes irritable, unfocused, unstable. He makes mistakes. He snaps at people. His carefully maintained mask of normalcy starts to slip. The show even shows us in Dexter New Blood that Dexter managed to stop killing for almost 10 years, but he did so through an extremely structured lifestyle, almost like a recovering addict who has built their entire day around avoiding triggers. And when he finally did kill again, after being pushed past his breaking point, it was like an addict falling off the wagon. One kill led to another, and the dark passenger came roaring back. But here's where the show takes the most interesting turn with this concept. In the later seasons, Dexter starts to question whether the dark passenger is real at all. Not in the sense of whether his urges are real, because they obviously are, but in the sense of whether this idea of a separate entity inside him is actually true, or whether it is just an excuse he has been telling himself his whole life to avoid facing what he really is. This shift begins in Season 7, when Dexter enters a relationship with Hannah McKay, a woman who has killed people herself, but who does not hide behind any kind of mythology about it. Hannah does not have a dark passenger. She does not have a code. She made choices, and she owns them. Being around Hannah forces Dexter to look at himself differently. If she can accept what she has done without blaming it on some inner force, why can he not do the same? Hannah begins to chip away at the idea that Dexter is a puppet, and the dark passenger is pulling the strings. She helps him see that maybe he has more control than he has been admitting to himself. Maybe the dark passenger is not a separate thing at all. Maybe it is just him. Maybe it has always been just him. This realization comes to a head in a scene that is one of the most important moments of character growth in the entire series. Dexter has a man named Joe Jensen, an arsonist, on his kill table. And in that moment, Dexter has a breakthrough. He realizes that the dark passenger is not some outside force. It is not an entity. It is not a thing that hijacked his brain when he was a toddler in a shipping container. It is him. It is a part of him. And he has been using it as an excuse to avoid taking real responsibility for his actions. After this moment, Dexter says something that directly contradicts everything he has believed about himself for decades. He says that the dark passenger has been with him ever since he can remember, pulling the strings, running the show. But as it turns out, he is no puppet. That single line represents a massive psychological shift. For the first time in his life, Dexter is owning his darkness. He is not blaming it on an entity. He is not treating it as a disease that was done to him. He is saying, "This is me. I did this. I chose this. The dark passenger did not make me kill those people. I killed those people." And whatever the reason, whatever the trauma that started it, The hand holding the knife has always been mine. This moment is reinforced shortly after, when Dexter kills a man named Clint McKay, Hannah's abusive father. After the kill, Dexter does not credit the dark passenger. He accepts personal responsibility for what he has done. It is a small detail in the dialogue, but it signals a fundamental change in how Dexter sees himself. Now, does this mean the dark passenger goes away? No. The urges remain. The need to kill remains. The pressure still builds, and it still needs to be released. But the story Dexter tells himself about why it happens, that changes. He stops being a victim of the dark passenger and starts being a person who has a darkness inside him that he has to manage. That might sound like a small difference, but psychologically, it is enormous. Because as long as the dark passenger was something separate, Dexter could always say, "It was not my fault." Once he accepts it as part of himself, he has to face the full weight of everything he has done. And the show does not let him escape that weight. In Dexter New Blood, we see the consequences of this acceptance play out in devastating fashion. Dexter can no longer hide behind the mythology. He knows what he is. He knows what he has done. And when his son Harrison looks at him and sees not a father, but a killer, Dexter cannot argue. He cannot point to the dark passenger and say it was that thing, not me. Because he already admitted, years ago, that there is no dark passenger. There is only Dexter Morgan and the choices he has made. The Dark Passenger is one of the most brilliant creations in television storytelling because it works on two levels at once. On the surface, it is a way for the show to give Dexter a compelling inner voice, a way to dramatize his internal struggle and make his thoughts visible to the audience. But on a deeper level, it is a mirror held up to how real people deal with the worst parts of themselves. How many of us have looked at something we did, something we are ashamed of, and told ourselves that it was not really us, that we were not in our right mind, that something came over us? The Dark Passenger is Dexter's version of that. It is the story we tell ourselves when the truth about who we are is too painful to face directly. Dexter spent decades hiding behind that story. And when he finally stopped hiding, when he finally looked in the mirror and saw not a victim of darkness, but a man who chose to walk in it, that was the beginning of the end for him. Because once you stop pretending the monster is separate from you, you have to decide what to do about the fact that the monster is you. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And Dexter's answer to that question, the way he chose to live with that knowledge, is written all over the way he moved through the world. The careful smiles, the rehearsed reactions, the relationships that looked perfect on the outside, but were held together with lies and performance. Dexter did not just wear a mask at work or around strangers. He wore a mask everywhere, with everyone, every single day of his life. And understanding how that mask worked, how he built it, and what it cost him to keep it on, is the next piece of this puzzle. Section 4. The Mask of Normalcy. Pretending to be human. There is a line Dexter says in the very first episode of the series that tells you everything you need to know about how he moves through the world. He says that people fake a lot of human interactions, but he feels like he fakes them all, and he fakes them very well. That line is not just a clever piece of writing. It is the foundation of Dexter Morgan's entire existence. Every smile, every handshake, every concerned look at a crime scene, every laugh at a coworker's joke, every kiss on his girlfriend's forehead, all of it is a performance. Carefully studied, carefully rehearsed, carefully delivered. And the terrifying part is that almost nobody around him can tell. This is what Dexter calls wearing a mask. And he has been wearing it since he was a child, because Harry Morgan taught him to put it on. We talked in the last section about how Harry built the code to channel Dexter's urges toward killing people who deserved it. But the code was only half of what Harry taught his son. The other half was equally important, and in some ways, even more demanding. Harry taught Dexter how to pretend to be normal, how to act like a regular person, how to blend into a crowd, hold down a job, maintain relationships, and move through everyday life without anyone ever suspecting that behind those calm brown eyes was a man who spent his nights wrapping people in plastic. Harry started these lessons early. There is a scene in the show where young Dexter refuses to smile for a family photo. The sun is in his eyes, and the sand at the beach is bothering him, and he simply does not feel like smiling. Harry pulls him aside and explains something that would become one of the core rules of Dexter's life. When somebody takes your picture, you smile. It does not matter if you are happy or not. You just do it to fit in. That is it. That is the lesson. You do not need to feel the emotion. You just need to show the emotion. Because that is what normal people do. And if you want to survive, you need to look like one of them. Think about how strange that lesson is when you really sit with it. Harry is not teaching his son to be happy. He is not teaching him to connect with his family. He is teaching him to perform happiness. To copy what other people do and mirror it back convincingly enough that no one looks too closely. And this becomes Dexter's entire approach to social life. He does not experience the world the way other people do. He watches how other people experience it, and then he copies them. Harry taught Dexter several specific rules about maintaining this mask. Never make a scene. Fake emotions when necessary. Do not stand out. Avoid drawing attention to yourself. Appear social, even if you would rather be alone. These were not suggestions. These were survival instructions. Because Harry knew that a man who seemed strange, who seemed cold, who seemed disconnected from the people around him, that man would attract suspicion. And suspicion was the one thing Dexter could never afford. There is another flashback in the show where Harry catches young Dexter participating in group bullying during a Little League game. A weaker kid on the team is being picked on, and Dexter has joined in. When Harry confronts him about it, Dexter is confused. He thought he was doing the right thing. He thought he was blending in, going along with what the group was doing, just like Harry told him to. But Harry corrects him. He tells Dexter that you cannot be a bully. That is the wrong kind of attention. Normal people do not target the weak. This moment shows how detailed and constant Harry's instruction was. Dexter was not just learning broad rules about acting normal. He was being coached through every specific situation, learning which behaviors were acceptable and which ones would blow his cover. Almost like an actor being directed through a role that never ends. And that is exactly what Dexter's life became. A role. A never-ending performance with no curtain call, no backstage, no moment where he could take off the costume and just be himself. Because himself was the one thing he could never show anyone. At work, Dexter plays the part of a dedicated, slightly awkward, mildly nerdy blood spatter analyst at the Miami Metro Police Department. He brings donuts to the office. He makes small talk with his colleagues. He laughs at the right moments and looks serious at the right moments. He is polite to his boss, friendly with the lab technician Vince Masuka, and supportive of his sister Deborah's career. On the surface, he is a perfectly fine coworker. Maybe a little quiet, maybe a little odd, but nothing that would make anyone look twice. But beneath that surface, Dexter is constantly calculating. Every interaction is a math problem. What would a normal person say right now? How would a normal person react to this news? What expression should my face be making? He describes this process throughout the series in his internal thoughts, and it is exhausting just to listen to. While everyone else at Miami Metro is going through their day reacting naturally to things, Dexter is running a constant program in his head, checking and double-checking every word he says and every look he gives to make sure nothing seems off. And for the most part, it works. His colleagues have no idea. His boss has no idea. Even Sergeant James Dokes, the one person at Miami Metro who senses something is wrong with Dexter, cannot put his finger on exactly what it is. Dokes just knows that something about Dexter does not feel right. There is something behind the smile that does not match. But Dokes can never prove it, and everyone else at the department thinks Dokes is being paranoid. That is how good Dexter's mask is. Even the one person whose gut is screaming that something is wrong cannot break through it. But the mask is most complex and most fragile in Dexter's personal life. His relationship with Rita Bennett is the ultimate test of his ability to perform normalcy. When Dexter first starts dating Rita, he does not do it because he has feelings for her. He does it because she is the perfect cover. Rita is a single mother coming out of an abusive marriage with a man named Paul Bennett. Because of what Paul did to her, Rita is afraid of physical closeness. She does not want sex. She does not want someone who is going to push her boundary. She wants someone gentle, someone patient, someone who will not demand too much. And Dexter, who has no interest in sex or romance either, sees this as the ideal arrangement. She will not ask too much of him emotionally or physically. And in return, he gets to look like a normal guy with a normal girlfriend. It is a transaction dressed up as a relationship. But something happens over the course of the first few seasons that Dexter does not expect. Rita starts to heal. She starts to move past the trauma of her abusive marriage. She becomes more confident, more open, more interested in a real relationship with real closeness. And suddenly, the arrangement that was so perfect for Dexter becomes a problem. Rita wants more. She wants emotional honesty. She wants physical connection. She wants to know who Dexter really is. And every step she takes toward him is a step closer to discovering the truth. Dexter considers ending the relationship at this point. He worries that if Rita gets too close, she will sense the darkness in him. She will see through the mask. But then something unexpected happens. During a therapy session with one of his intended victims, a psychologist named Emmett Meridian, Dexter is put into a deeply relaxed state, and in that state, he sees an image that shakes him. A small boy sitting in a pool of blood, his own childhood trauma, surfacing in a moment of vulnerability. Shaken and emotional in a way he almost never is, Dexter runs to Rita's house. They have sex for the first time, and from that moment on, the relationship changes. It becomes something Dexter cannot fully control with his mask. Feelings start to creep in, small ones, muffled ones, but real. This is the great tension of Dexter's mask throughout the series. He puts it on to protect himself. He wears it to hide what he is. But the longer he wears it, and the more convincingly he plays the role of a normal man with a normal life, the more the line between the mask and the real person starts to blur. Is Dexter pretending to care about Rita's children, Astor and Cody? Or does he actually care? Is he faking his protective instincts toward Deborah? Or are those real? Is the man who brings donuts to the office and remembers everyone's birthday and stands by his sister in her worst moments, is that man entirely fake? Or has the mask, worn long enough and convincingly enough, started to grow into his skin? The show never gives a clean answer to this question, and that is part of what makes it so smart. Because the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Dexter starts out fully performing. Everything is calculated. Everything is fake. Everything is a move in a chess game designed to keep him hidden. But over 8 seasons, small cracks appear. Moments where the performance seems to stop, and something genuine leaks through. His devastation after Rita's death. His protective fury when someone threatens Harrison. His loyalty to Deborah that goes far beyond what a mask would require. These moments suggest that the mask, while it started as pure performance, may have become something more complicated over time. There is also a deeply sad element to the mask that the show explores, especially in the earlier seasons. Dexter is lonely. He may not feel emotions the way other people do, but he is aware of what he is missing. He watches other people connect with each other, love each other, laugh together, comfort each other, and he knows he is on the outside of all of it. The mask gets him close to those experiences. It lets him sit at the table. But it also keeps a wall of glass between him and everyone around him. He can see warmth, but he cannot feel it. He can imitate closeness, but he cannot experience it. He is always watching through the window of his own performance, close enough to see what normal life looks like, but never close enough to actually live it. And the mask is not just about fooling other people. In many ways, it is also about fooling himself. Dexter uses the mask to pretend that he has everything under control, that he is managing his darkness successfully, that the code and the performance and the careful balancing act are working. But every season chips away at that illusion a little more. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation in Season 2, Dokes getting too close, Miguel Prado learning his secret in Season 3, Rita's murder in Season 4, his sister Deborah walking in on him killing Travis Marshall in Season 7. Each of these events is a crack in the mask, a moment where the performance almost fails and the real Dexter is nearly exposed. And every time the mask cracks, Dexter scrambles to repair it. He lies, he manipulates, he destroys evidence, he frames other people. He does whatever it takes to get the mask back in place, because without it, his entire world collapses. The mask is not just a tool for hiding. It is the thing holding his life together. Without the performance of normalcy, there is no job at Miami Metro, no family, no sister, no son, no place in the world at all. There is just a man standing alone in the dark, with blood on his hands, and nowhere to go. The most haunting thing about Dexter's mask is a line he delivers about Halloween. He says it is his favorite holiday because it is the one night of the year when everyone else is wearing a mask too. For one night, everyone is pretending to be something they are not. Everyone is hiding behind a costume. And for that one night, Dexter does not feel so different from everybody else. He can walk through the crowd and know that for once, he is doing exactly what everyone around him is doing. Hiding. But Halloween ends. The masks come off. People go back to being themselves. And Dexter goes back to being the only person in the room who cannot take his off. Because his mask is not a costume. It is a prison. A beautifully constructed, perfectly maintained prison that he has to live inside every single day. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And yet, as convincing as the mask is, there is one question that keeps coming back throughout the series. One question that no amount of performing can answer. If Dexter has spent his entire life pretending to be human, copying emotions he does not feel, mimicking connections he does not experience, then what exactly is he underneath it all? Is he a monster wearing a human face? Or is he something harder to define? Something the simple labels of good and evil cannot quite capture. That question of what to actually call Dexter Morgan, what box to put him in, what diagnosis to give him, is something that psychologists, fans, and even the characters in the show itself have been arguing about since the very first season. Section 5. Psychopath, sociopath, or something else. Ever since the first episode of Dexter aired, people have been trying to figure out what to call him. Not his name, we know his name, but what he is, what label fits, what category he belongs in. Is Dexter Morgan a psychopath? Is he a sociopath? Is he something else entirely that does not have a name? This question has been debated by fans, by writers, by actual psychologists and researchers. And the answer is a lot more complicated than you might think. Because the truth is, Dexter does not fit neatly into any single box. He has traits that match certain labels perfectly, and other traits that break those same labels wide open. Let us start with the basics. In the show itself, Dexter is described as a psychopath. That word gets used by multiple characters across different seasons. Harry treats Dexter as though he is a psychopath from the very beginning, which is why he builds the code instead of seeking therapy. In Season 8, Dr. Evelyn Vogel, who is an expert on people with violent and dangerous minds, explicitly studies Dexter as a psychopath. She helped Harry build the code precisely because she believed Dexter had the kind of mind that could not be fixed, only managed. The show's internal logic treats Dexter's condition as something he was not born with, but developed as a result of what happened in the shipping container. Something that rewired his brain permanently during the most critical period of his development. But here is where things get interesting. In the real world, the terms psychopath and sociopath are not actually official medical diagnoses. If you go to the book that doctors and mental health professionals use to diagnose people, a book called the DSM, which stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, you will not find either of those words listed as a condition. What you will find instead is something called antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD for short. This is the closest official diagnosis to what most people mean when they say psychopath or sociopath. It describes a pattern of behavior where a person consistently ignores the rights of others, lies and manipulates without guilt, breaks rules and laws without caring about the consequences, and struggles to form real emotional bonds with the people around them. Now, even though psychopath and sociopath are not in the official medical books, psychologists and researchers still use those words all the time. They just use them to describe different things. And this is where the debate about Dexter gets really interesting. When most experts talk about the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath, they tend to describe them in ways that point to different causes and different behaviors. A sociopath is usually described as someone whose condition comes from their environment. Something happened to them, usually during childhood, that damaged their ability to connect with others and follow society's rules. Sociopaths tend to be impulsive. They act on emotion. They can form bonds with certain people, even if those bonds are messy and unstable. They are more likely to have outbursts and lose control. A psychopath, on the other hand, is usually described as someone whose condition is more rooted in how their brain is wired. It might be something they were born with, or it might come from very early damage to the parts of the brain that handle emotions and decision-making. Psychopaths are calm, calculated, and controlled. They plan carefully. They manipulate with precision. They can imitate emotions very convincingly, but underneath the performance, they feel very little. They are not impulsive. They are patient. They are organized. And they are extremely good at hiding what they really are. When you lay those two descriptions side by side and hold them up against Dexter, the answer seems obvious at first. Dexter is a psychopath. He is calm. He is calculated. He plans his kills with extreme precision. He is organized to the point of near perfection. He can fake emotions so well that his own wife, his co-workers, and his sister had no idea what he really was for years. He does not act on impulse. He follows a careful process every time. He stalks his targets, researches them, confirms they are guilty, prepares his kill room, and carries out the act with total control. Everything about the way Dexter operates screams psychopath, and there is more evidence pointing in that direction. A research study that applied a real psychological scoring tool called the Hare Psychopathy Checklist to Dexter's character found that he matched 19 out of 20 traits on the list. These traits included things like a charming personality on the surface, a grand sense of self, being easily bored, lying and manipulation, a lack of guilt, shallow emotions, problems with behavior from a young age, impulsive tendencies in certain situations, difficulty maintaining long-term relationships, and an inability to accept responsibility for his actions. The only trait Dexter did not match was one about violating the terms of being released from custody. And that is only because he was never caught, so it simply did not apply. 19 out of 20. By that measure, Dexter is a textbook psychopath. But here is where the clean label starts to fall apart. Because there are things about Dexter that psychopaths, at least as the experts describe them, are not supposed to do. Psychopaths are not supposed to form real emotional bonds. They can fake them, and they can use people, but they are not supposed to genuinely care about anyone. Dexter, over the course of 8 seasons and beyond, shows signs of caring about people that go beyond what a performance would require. His relationship with his sister Deborah is the most obvious example. Dexter is fiercely protective of Deborah. He puts himself at risk to keep her safe. He changes his plans, compromises his own security, and makes decisions that are clearly driven by something deeper than strategy. When Deborah is shot and falls into a permanent unconscious state in the season 8 finale, Dexter makes the devastating decision to turn off her life support. He then carries her body out of the hospital and takes her to sea on his boat. This is not the action of a man who feels nothing. This is the action of a man who is drowning in grief so deep he cannot stay in the world he has built. And then there is Harrison. Dexter's relationship with his son is one of the strongest pieces of evidence against a pure psychopath diagnosis. From the moment Harrison is born, Dexter shows a protectiveness and a tenderness that seem to come from somewhere real. When Dexter finds baby Harrison sitting in Rita's blood after the Trinity killer murders her, the look on his face is not performance. It is horror. It is recognition. It is a father seeing his own worst nightmare play out on his child. And in the later seasons, and into New Blood and Resurrection, Dexter's connection to Harrison only deepens. He tells Harrison at one point that while he does not feel love the way other people do, the way he feels about Harrison is different from the way he feels about anyone else. That is not a textbook psychopath talking. That is something messier, something harder to categorize. Dexter also shows guilt, which psychopaths are not supposed to feel. When he accidentally kills an innocent man named Jonathan Farrow, a photographer who turned out not to be a murderer after all, Dexter is genuinely shaken. He is disturbed by what he has done. He does not shrug it off or move on without a second thought. The realization that he killed an innocent person haunts him and makes him question whether his process is as reliable as he thought. A true psychopath, as the experts describe one, would not care. They would rationalize it and move on. Dexter cannot.
Dr. Todd Grande, a licensed mental health counselor who analyzed Dexter's character on his YouTube channel, came to an interesting conclusion about all of this.
He said that Dexter is shown to be charming, thoughtful, conflicted, and intelligent, which makes him entertaining to watch, but not realistic by actual psychological standards. Grande pointed out that a real serial killer would not look or act anything like Dexter. Most real serial killers are driven by a need to dominate other people, often in a sexual way, which is something Dexter almost never displays. Grande concluded that Dexter is more of an idealized version of what audiences hope a psychopath could be, rather than an accurate picture of what one actually is. And that brings up an important point. Dexter is a fictional character. He was created by an author named Jeff Lindsay and developed further by television writers. He was not designed in a laboratory using medical textbooks. He was designed to be compelling, to be watchable, to be someone audiences would root for, even though they knew they should not. And to make that work, the writers gave Dexter traits that do not all belong to the same diagnosis. They gave him the coldness and calculation of a psychopath, the trauma-based origin of a sociopath, the emotional growth of someone who might not be either, and the internal conflict of a person who is aware that something is deeply wrong with them, but cannot figure out how to fix it. Some people who have studied the character have suggested that Dexter might be better understood not as a psychopath or a sociopath, but as someone with a mix of different things going on. There are elements of what doctors call antisocial personality disorder in his behavior, certainly. But there are also elements that suggest other conditions. His need for extreme order and ritual in his kills. The plastic wrap, the careful setup, the blood slides, the confrontation with the victim. All of that suggests a mind that craves control and structure in a way that goes beyond just being organized. Some have pointed to obsessive-compulsive tendencies. Others have noted traits that overlap with something called schizoid personality disorder, which describes people who prefer to be alone, have very limited emotional range, and feel disconnected from the social world around them. Dexter checks a lot of those boxes too. Even Dr. Vogel, the character in the show who is supposed to be the expert on people like Dexter, seems surprised by what she finds when she actually spends time with him. She expects a textbook case. What she gets instead is a man who shows loyalty to his sister, who seems to genuinely care about his son, who demonstrates something that looks an awful lot like love, even though he insists he is incapable of it. Vogel notices this, and it challenges her assumptions. She came in expecting a monster she could study. She found something much more difficult to explain. And maybe that is the real answer. Maybe Dexter Morgan cannot be reduced to a single label. Maybe the reason fans and experts have been arguing about his diagnosis for nearly 20 years is that he was never meant to fit into one box. He is a character built from pieces of many different psychological conditions, held together by a traumatic origin story and a code that substitutes for the moral compass he never developed on his own. He is a puzzle with pieces from different sets, and no matter how you arrange them, the picture never looks quite complete. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What we can say with certainty is this: whatever label you put on him, whatever diagnosis you think fits best, Dexter Morgan's mind operates differently from nearly everyone around him. He processes the world differently. He experiences emotions differently. He relates to people differently. And the way he manages all of that difference, the specific things he does to cope with who he is and what he feels and what he needs, that is where the real psychology of Dexter gets its most fascinating. Because it is not just about what is wrong with his brain. It is about what he does with it. And what Dexter does, more than anything else, is perform a very specific ritual. A ritual of hunting, preparing, confronting, and killing that serves a psychological purpose far deeper than just satisfying an urge. That ritual, and what it reveals about the way Dexter's mind actually works, is something we need to look at very closely. Section 6. The Kill Ritual. Why Dexter needs more than just the kill. If Dexter Morgan just wanted to kill people, he could do it quickly. He has the knowledge. He has the training. He studied at the top of his class in medical school before switching to forensic science. He holds a black belt in jiu-jitsu. He is stronger, smarter, and more prepared than almost anyone he goes after. If all he needed was the act itself, he could make it fast and simple. But he does not. He never does. Because for Dexter, the killing is not just about ending a life. It is about something much more complicated. It is about control. It is about order. It is about turning the chaos inside him into something structured, something predictable, something he can manage. And the way he does that is through his ritual. Dexter's kill ritual is one of the most iconic elements of the entire show. It follows a specific pattern that he repeats almost every single time, with very few exceptions across the entire series. And every single step of that pattern serves a psychological purpose that goes far beyond just getting rid of a bad person. It starts long before the actual kill. Dexter begins by selecting a target. He does not pick people at random. He follows the code of Harry, which means he spends days, sometimes weeks, researching a potential victim. He digs into their background. He looks at police records, unsolved cases, evidence files. He uses his position at the Miami Metro Police Department to access information that a regular person could not get. He hacks into computers. He follows people. He watches them. He gathers proof, real proof, that this person is a killer who has escaped justice. This research phase is not just about following Harry's rules. It is about certainty. Dexter needs to know, beyond any doubt, that the person he is going to kill deserves it. Because without that certainty, the whole system falls apart. Without it, he is just a murderer. With it, at least in his own mind, he is something else. Once Dexter has confirmed his target, the next step is preparation. And this is where the ritual really starts to show its psychological depth. Dexter prepares a kill room. He finds a location, often an abandoned building, a warehouse, or sometimes the victim's own space, and he covers it entirely in plastic sheeting. The floor, the walls, the furniture, everything gets wrapped in clear plastic. This serves a practical purpose, of course. The plastic catches blood and other evidence, making cleanup easier and ensuring Dexter leaves no trace behind. But it also serves a deeper purpose. The plastic creates a controlled environment, a sealed space, a world within a world where Dexter is in complete command. Nothing in that room moves or happens without his permission. Every surface is clean, contained, managed. For a man whose inner life is defined by chaos, by urges he cannot fully control, by a darkness that never goes away, that level of control over his physical surroundings is not just useful, it is necessary. Think about what Dexter's mind feels like on a daily basis. He has described it himself many times throughout the series. There is a constant pressure building inside him, a need that grows louder and more demanding the longer it goes unsatisfied. His thoughts get darker. His focus gets worse. He becomes irritable, restless, distracted. The carefully maintained mask of normalcy starts to slip. He is, in his own words, a man barely holding it together. The kill room is the opposite of all that. It is the one place where nothing is out of his control. The one place where the chaos stops and order takes over. And for Dexter, that shift from chaos to order is part of what makes the ritual work. After the room is prepared, Dexter captures his target. His preferred method for most of the original series is a drug called M99, an animal tranquilizer that he injects into the victim's neck. The drug knocks them unconscious almost instantly, allowing Dexter to transport them to the kill room without a struggle. In later seasons and into New Blood, he sometimes uses ketamine instead, but the approach is the same. Quick, quiet, efficient. No mess, no noise, no witnesses. Once the target is in the kill room, Dexter removes their clothing and secures them to a table using plastic wrap or duct tape. The victim is completely immobilized. They cannot move, cannot fight, cannot escape. And then Dexter waits. He waits for them to wake up. This is a critical part of the ritual. Dexter does not kill unconscious people. He needs them awake. He needs them to see where they are, to understand what is happening, and most importantly, to face what they have done. This is where the kill room transforms into something almost like a courtroom. Before the kill, Dexter sets up photographs around the room. These are photos of the victim's own victims, the people they murdered, the lives they destroyed. Dexter surrounds his target with the faces of the innocent people they killed, sometimes adding candles or other items, turning the space into a kind of shrine for the dead. When the target wakes up and looks around, they see the evidence of their own crimes staring back at them from every direction. And then Dexter talks to them. He confronts them. He tells them why they are there. He makes them acknowledge what they did, This is not interrogation, and it is not torture in the traditional sense. Dexter does not need a confession for legal purposes. He already has his proof. What he needs is something more personal. He needs the killer to know that someone saw what they did, that someone found them, that someone is holding them accountable. In a world where these people escaped the justice system, where they walked free while their victims' families suffered, Dexter's kill room is the one place where they cannot escape. The one place where the truth catches up with them. Dexter himself has described this part of the ritual as intoxicating. That word is important, not satisfying, not necessary. Intoxicating. It suggests something that goes beyond simple relief. There is a rush to it, a high. The moment when Dexter stands over his target, surrounded by the evidence of their crimes, completely in control of whether they live or die, that moment is the closest thing Dexter has to feeling truly alive. The emptiness inside him, the hollow feeling he describes so often, temporarily fills up. For a brief window, he is not numb. He is not disconnected. He is present in a way that nothing else in his life can make him feel. After the confrontation, Dexter collects his trophy. Using a surgical scalpel, he makes a small cut on the victim's cheek, usually just below the right eye, and collects a single drop of blood. He places this blood between two glass microscope slides and stores it. Over the years, Dexter accumulates dozens of these blood slides, which he keeps hidden inside a wooden filing box tucked inside his air conditioner. These slides are his trophies, his keepsakes. Dexter himself once compared them to how some gang members earn teardrop tattoos for their kills. Everyone needs their keepsakes, he said. One man's tattoos are another man's blood slides. The trophy collection is another layer of the ritual's psychological function. Each slide represents a kill. Each kill represents a moment when Dexter was in total control, when the chaos was silenced, when the dark passenger was fed. By keeping the slides, Dexter is preserving those moments. He can go back to them. He can look at them and remember. In a life where he feels almost nothing most of the time, those slides are physical proof that he has felt something, even if what he felt was dark. It is worth noting that Dexter's relationship with the blood slides changes over the course of the series. After the death of Ray Speltzer in Season 7, Dexter makes the decision to get rid of his second box of slides. He burns them along with Speltzer's body. This is a significant moment because it suggests Dexter is starting to move past the need for trophies, starting to let go of one piece of the ritual. And by the time we reach New Blood, years later, Dexter kills Matt Caldwell without taking a blood slide at all. He briefly improvises one from broken glass, but then decides against keeping it. The trophies, which once felt essential, are no longer necessary. The ritual is evolving, just as Dexter himself is evolving. After the trophy is collected, the kill itself happens. Dexter's preferred method is a single fatal stab to the heart or the neck. He uses a large knife in most cases, though he has varied his method depending on the circumstances. In certain cases, he has killed victims using a method that mirrors how they killed their own victims. He killed Santos Jimenez, the man who murdered his mother, with a chainsaw, the same weapon Jimenez used on Laura Moser. He stabbed little Chino with Chino's own machete. These mirror kills add another layer to the ritual. They are not just executions, they are statements. They are Dexter saying to his victim, "This is what you did, and now it is being done to you." After the kill, the final phase of the ritual begins. Cleanup and disposal. Dexter dismembers the body, wraps the pieces in heavy plastic bags, loads them onto his boat, the Slice of Life, and dumps them into the ocean in a specific location in the Gulf Stream, where the current carries them away. This disposal method worked for years, until the bags were eventually discovered by treasure hunters in Season 2, triggering the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation. After that close call, Dexter adapted his methods, sometimes using other disposal methods like incinerators in later seasons. The entire ritual, from research to disposal, can take days or even weeks. And every single step is deliberate. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is left to chance. Dexter approaches each kill with the care and attention of someone performing surgery, which makes sense given his medical training. But the precision is not just about avoiding getting caught. It is about the experience itself. The ritual gives the kill meaning. It transforms an act of violence into something structured, purposeful, and controlled. Without the ritual, a kill is just chaos. With it, the kill becomes the one thing in Dexter's life that makes sense. And that is the real psychological function of the ritual. It is not about the blood. It is not about the violence. It is about a man who is born into chaos, who is forged in a shipping container surrounded by death, who has spent his entire life feeling like nothing inside him is stable or safe or under control, creating the one space in the world where everything is exactly as it should be. The kill room is Dexter's church, his therapy session, his moment of peace. It is the only place where the noise in his head goes quiet and he can breathe. The show frames this as an addiction, and the comparison is earned. When Dexter goes too long without killing, the pressure builds until it becomes almost physically painful. He describes it as a need that takes over his thinking, that pushes everything else to the side, that makes the mask harder and harder to maintain. And when he finally gives in and completes the ritual, the relief is immediate. The pressure drops. The world comes back into focus. He can function again. Until the pressure starts to build once more. Rita saw this pattern without understanding what it really was. She noticed Dexter disappearing at odd hours, keeping secrets, lying about where he had been. She assumed he was using drugs, and when she confronted him about it, Dexter went along with that story because the truth, that his addiction was to killing, was not something he could ever explain. So he attended Narcotics Anonymous meetings and spoke about his struggle in vague terms that technically applied to both addiction and his actual situation. And the people in those meetings, especially Lila, responded to him because the pattern is the same. The buildup, the giving in, the temporary relief, the shame, the cycle starting over. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Dexter Morgan is, in many ways, an addict. His drug just happens to be the most extreme one imaginable, and his ritual is the needle. The method of delivery that turns raw compulsion into something structured enough to survive. But an addict does not exist in a vacuum. The way Dexter lives, the things he does, the people he hunts, all of it reflects something back at him. And nowhere is that reflection clearer than in the killers he chooses to go after. Because every season of Dexter brings a new villain, and every single one of those villains holds up a mirror to a different part of Dexter's own mind. Section 7. The Mirror Killers. What Dexter's enemies reveal about himself. One of the smartest things the writers of Dexter ever did was make sure that every major villain in the show was not just a threat to Dexter's safety, but a reflection of who he is. Every season introduces a new killer, a new antagonist, a new dark figure that Dexter has to hunt down. But what makes these villains so much more than just obstacles is that each one of them represents a different version of Dexter himself, a different path he could have taken, a different answer to the question of what happens when darkness takes root inside a person and grows without the right constraints. Dexter does not just hunt these people. He sees himself in them, and that is what makes each confrontation so psychologically rich. Let us start at the very beginning. Season 1. The Ice Truck Killer. For most of the first season, Dexter is being taunted by a mysterious serial killer who leaves behind carefully staged crime scenes with no blood. The victims are drained completely, and then arranged in public places, posed like dolls. The killer leaves clues that seem specifically designed for Dexter to find, as if the murders are a message meant only for him. And they are. Because the ice truck killer turns out to be Brian Moser, Dexter's biological brother. The other little boy who was in that shipping container. Brian is what Dexter could have become without Harry Morgan. Both brothers experienced the exact same trauma. Both sat in their mother's blood for 2 days. Both were permanently changed by what they witnessed. But Harry chose to save Dexter and left Brian behind. Brian grew up in the foster care system with no one to guide him, no code to follow, no father figure to teach him rules. And he became a serial killer with no boundaries. He kills innocent people. He kills for the thrill of it. He has no moral framework whatsoever. Brian does not care about right and wrong. He does not care about justice. He only cares about the kill itself and about finding his brother, the only person in the world who might understand him. When Dexter discovers that the ice truck killer is his brother, it shakes him to his core. Because Brian is holding up a mirror and showing Dexter the version of himself that exists without the code. Brian is pure, unfiltered darkness. No mask, no rules, no pretending. And the most disturbing part is that Brian wants Dexter to join him. He wants them to kill together, as brothers, without any restrictions. He wants Dexter to throw away everything Harry taught him and embrace what he truly is. Dexter is tempted. The show makes that very clear. There is a part of him that feels the pull of Brian's offer. A part of him that wonders what it would feel like to stop pretending, to stop following rules, to just let the dark passenger run free. But in the end, Dexter chooses the code. He chooses Harry's way. And he kills Brian, his own brother, because he knows that Brian will never stop targeting innocent people, including Deborah, who Brian had been dating as part of his plan to get close to Dexter. Dexter stages Brian's death to look like a suicide by cutting his throat. Brian Moser is the most direct mirror in the entire series. He answers the question that hangs over every single episode. What would Dexter be without the code? The answer is Brian. A killer with no limits, no purpose, and no humanity left at all. Season 2 does not introduce a traditional villain for Dexter to hunt in the same way. Instead, the threat comes from within his own world. The discovery of his dumped bodies in the ocean triggers the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, and Sergeant James Dokes gets closer and closer to the truth. But this season does introduce Lila Tournay, and she functions as a mirror in her own way. Lila is chaotic, impulsive, manipulative, and destructive. She is drawn to Dexter because she senses the darkness in him, and she wants to set it free. She encourages him to stop holding back, to stop following rules, to embrace his urges without shame. Lila represents what happens when addiction has no structure around it. She is Dexter without discipline, without the careful process, without the ritual. She is chaos, and her presence in Dexter's life nearly destroys everything he has built. Season 3 brings Miguel Prado, an assistant district attorney who discovers Dexter's secret and, instead of turning him in, wants in. Miguel is fascinated by what Dexter does. He sees it as a powerful form of justice, one that goes beyond the courtroom. He wants to be Dexter's partner, his friend, his equal. And for a while, Dexter lets him. For the first time in his life, Dexter has someone he can share his secret with. Someone who accepts him and wants to participate in what he does. But Miguel quickly reveals what happens when a person without the code tries to play Dexter's game. Miguel starts bending the rules. He begins targeting people who are not killers, people who have simply gotten in his way professionally or personally. He uses the idea of justice as a cover for his own anger and his own desire for power. Miguel shows Dexter that the code is not just a set of rules. It is a line. And without it, the act of killing stops being about justice and becomes about ego. Miguel is the mirror that asks, what happens when someone with power, but without discipline, tries to walk Dexter's path? The answer is corruption. Miguel becomes exactly the kind of person Dexter would normally put on his table. And then there is Season 4. Arthur Mitchell, the Trinity Killer. And this is the mirror that cuts the deepest. Arthur Mitchell, played by John Lithgow, is a respected community leader. He builds houses for the less fortunate with a charitable organization. He has a wife, children, a home in the suburbs. He goes to church. He coaches his son's football team. He is, by every outward measure, a pillar of his community. And he has been murdering people in a ritualistic pattern for over 30 years. The Trinity Killer earns his name because his kills follow a cycle of 3 specific murders, each one mirroring a traumatic event from his childhood. He kills a young woman in a bathtub, recreating his sister's suicide. He forces a woman to jump from a building, recreating his mother's death. And he bludgeons a man to death, recreating the murder he committed against his abusive father. This cycle repeats over and over, across decades, in different cities. And no one ever suspects the kind, generous family man named Arthur Mitchell. Dexter becomes obsessed with Mitchell, not just because Mitchell is a killer who fits the code, but because Mitchell appears to have solved a problem that Dexter has been struggling with his entire life. How do you balance a secret life of killing with a real family? How do you be a father and a husband and a monster all at the same time? Dexter uses a fake name, Kyle Butler, to get close to Mitchell and study him. He inserts himself into Mitchell's personal life. He goes to his house. He meets his family. He watches how Mitchell operates. He wants to learn from him. But what Dexter discovers is horrifying. Behind closed doors, Mitchell is a tyrant. He terrorizes his family. His wife lives in constant fear. His son is beaten and controlled. His daughter is kept under such strict surveillance that she has almost no life of her own. The happy family image is a lie, held together by violence and intimidation. Mitchell has not balanced his 2 lives at all. He has simply crushed everyone around him into silence. This is the mirror that matters most, because it forces Dexter to confront something he has been avoiding. Mitchell is proof that you cannot have both. You cannot be a killer and a family man. One will always devour the other. And Dexter, who at this point is married to Rita, who has a newborn son named Harrison, who has stepchildren he genuinely seems to care about, has to face the possibility that his own attempt to balance darkness and family is just as doomed as Mitchell's. And the season proves it. Dexter delays killing Mitchell because he is so fascinated by studying him, and that delay has devastating consequences. Mitchell discovers Dexter's real identity, and in retaliation, Mitchell goes to Dexter's house while Dexter is away, finds Rita alone, and murders her in the bathtub. He slits her femoral artery and leaves her to bleed out. When Dexter comes home, he finds baby Harrison sitting on the bathroom floor, crying, covered in his mother's blood. Rita is dead in the tub, and the parallel to Dexter's own origin story, a child sitting in the blood of a murdered parent, is devastating and deliberate. Arthur Mitchell is the mirror that tells Dexter the truth he does not want to hear. You think you are different from me. You think the code and the mask and the careful balancing act make you special. But you are not. You are a killer. And killers destroy the people they love. It is not a matter of if. It is a matter of when. The later seasons continue this pattern of mirror villains, though the reflections become more specific. Jordan Chase in Season 5 runs a self-help empire while secretly leading a group of men who kidnap and assault women. He represents the ultimate version of wearing a mask. A man who publicly preaches about empowerment, while privately committing terrible acts. Travis Marshall in Season 6 believes he is doing God's work through his murders, creating elaborate religious displays with his victims. He represents what happens when a killer wraps their violence in a belief system, which is not entirely different from what Dexter does with the code. And in Season 8, Oliver Saxon, also known as the brain surgeon, provides one final mirror. Saxon is another one of Dr. Vogel's former patients, a man she studied just as she studied Dexter. But where Dexter accepted the code and used it to structure his life, Saxon rejected all guidance and became purely violent. Saxon is the version of Dexter that said no to every guardrail. And his rampage in the final season, which includes killing Vogel herself, shows what happens when there is nothing at all standing between a damaged mind and the world. Every single one of these villains teaches Dexter something about himself. Brian teaches him that the code is the only thing separating him from complete monstrousness. Lila teaches him that chaos without structure leads to destruction. Miguel teaches him that sharing his secret with the wrong person turns justice into abuse of power. Mitchell teaches him that the darkness will eventually consume everything he cares about. Chase teaches him that masks can be even more elaborate than his own. Marshall teaches him that wrapping violence in purpose does not make it righteous. And Saxon teaches him that rejecting help entirely leads to becoming something beyond saving. But here is what makes all of these mirrors truly powerful. They do not just show Dexter what he could become. They show him what he already is, just from different angles. Every mirror villain is Dexter, with one variable changed. Remove the code, and you get Brian. Remove discipline, and you get Lila. Add a partner, and you get Miguel. Add a family, and you get Mitchell. Add religion, and you get Marshall. And every time Dexter looks at one of these killers, really looks at them, he sees a piece of himself staring back. That kind of self-recognition is psychologically brutal, because it means that no matter how much Dexter tells himself he is different, no matter how carefully he follows the code, no matter how convincingly he wears the mask, there is always a version of him that is just one bad decision away from becoming the thing he hunts. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And the psychological framework that best explains this constant internal battle, this war between what Dexter wants to be and what he is afraid he really is something that has been studied and written about for over 100 years. It is the oldest and most famous way of understanding the human mind, and Dexter Morgan might be the best example of it ever put on television. Section 8. The War Inside. The 3 parts of Dexter's mind. For over 100 years, one of the most popular ways of understanding the human mind has been to break it into 3 parts. 3 forces that live inside all of us, constantly pushing and pulling against each other, fighting for control over what we think, what we feel, and what we do. This idea was developed by a man named Sigmund Freud, and even though many of his theories have been questioned and debated over the years, this particular idea remains one of the most useful tools for understanding characters like Dexter Morgan. Because when you look at Dexter through the lens of these 3 parts of the mind, suddenly, everything about him clicks into place. The first part is the most basic. It is the part of the mind that deals with raw desires: hunger, thirst, anger, fear, the need for pleasure, the need to act on impulse without thinking about consequences. This part of the mind does not care about right or wrong. It does not care about other people. It does not care about the future. It only cares about what it wants right now, in this moment. And it will push you toward getting it no matter what. Think of it as the animal part of your brain, the part that reacts before you think, the part that says, I want this and I want it now. In Dexter, this first part of the mind is the dark passenger. The dark passenger is pure urge, pure need. It does not care about the code. It does not care about Dexter's family. It does not care about his job, or his mask, or his carefully constructed life. It only cares about one thing: the kill. When the dark passenger rises up inside Dexter, everything else fades into the background. His thoughts narrow. His focus sharpens. The world shrinks down to a single point, and that point is the target on his table. The dark passenger is the part of Dexter that wants to kill, that needs to kill, that will not stop demanding to be fed until Dexter gives in. Throughout the series, Dexter describes the dark passenger in exactly these terms. It is a hunger, a compulsion, a force that builds and builds inside him until he cannot ignore it any longer. When he tries to resist it, he falls apart. He becomes sloppy, irritable, distracted. His performance of normalcy suffers. His relationships strain. He makes mistakes at work. The dark passenger does not negotiate. It does not compromise. It does not wait patiently. It demands, and eventually, Dexter always gives in. This is the raw, unfiltered part of Dexter's mind. The part that was born in the shipping container. The part that took root in all that blood and darkness, and grew into something that could never be removed. It is the engine that drives everything Dexter does, whether he wants it to or not. The second part of the mind is the opposite of the first. Where the first part is all about desire and impulse, the second part is all about rules and morality. It is the voice in your head that tells you what you should do, what is right and wrong, what society expects of you. It is the part of you that feels guilt when you do something bad, and pride when you do something good. It is shaped by your parents, your teachers, your culture, the people who raised you and taught you how to behave. The second part of the mind is your moral compass, the thing that keeps the first part from running wild. In Dexter, the second part of his mind is Harry Morgan. Not the real Harry Morgan, who died years before the series begins, but the version of Harry that lives inside Dexter's head. Throughout the entire show, Dexter has conversations with an image of his dead father. Harry appears to him in moments of crisis, in moments of temptation, in moments when Dexter is about to make a dangerous choice. And Harry's role in these conversations is almost always the same. He reminds Dexter of the code. He warns him about the consequences of breaking the rules. He tells Dexter to be careful, to think ahead, to stay disciplined. Harry is Dexter's conscience, or rather, Harry is the closest thing Dexter has to a conscience. Because Dexter does not appear to have developed one on his own. Normal people develop their sense of right and wrong gradually, through experience, through the guidance of the people around them, through feeling empathy for others and learning from their mistakes. Dexter's emotional development was so severely damaged by the shipping container trauma that this natural process never happened for him. He did not grow a moral compass from the inside, so Harry installed one from the outside. And that installed moral compass is what Dexter runs on. When he is deciding whether to kill someone, he does not check his feelings. He does not ask himself whether it feels wrong. He checks the code. He asks himself what Harry would say. He runs the situation through the set of rules his father gave him and follows whatever answer comes out. This is why Harry's image keeps appearing throughout the series. Dexter literally cannot make moral decisions without consulting the framework Harry built for him. Without Harry, Dexter has no moral voice at all. This is also why Harry's image is not always helpful. There are moments in the series where the version of Harry in Dexter's head gives advice that is cold, pragmatic, and sometimes questionable. Because the code was never really about morality in the deepest sense. It was about survival. It was about keeping Dexter out of prison and keeping innocent people alive. Those are good goals, but they are not the same as having a real sense of right and wrong. The code tells Dexter who he can kill. It does not teach him why killing is wrong. And that gap between rules and true morality is a gap that Dexter falls through again and again. Now, the third part of the mind is the part that sits between the other two. It is the part that has to manage the constant war between desire and morality, between what you want and what you should do, between the animal impulse and the moral rule. This third part is the decision maker, the negotiator, the one that looks at both sides, considers the situation, and tries to find a path that satisfies both without destroying everything. In most people, this third part is the one running the show most of the time. It is your sense of self, your identity, the you that you experience as you. In Dexter, this third part is Dexter himself, the character we watch, the man who narrates the show, the person who gets up every morning and has to figure out how to balance the dark passenger's screaming need to kill with Harry's rules about who he can kill and how he can stay hidden. Every single day of Dexter's life is an exercise in managing these two opposing forces. The dark urge pulls him in one direction. Harry's code pulls him in another. And Dexter, the actual person in the middle, has to find a way to keep both of them satisfied without his life falling apart. When this balancing act works, Dexter functions. He goes to work. He maintains his relationships. He follows the code. He kills people who deserve it. He cleans up after himself. He keeps the mask in place. Everything holds together, even if it is barely. When it does not work, when one side overpowers the other, things go terribly wrong. When the dark passenger wins out over Harry's code, Dexter kills people he should not. He kills Rankin, the man in the bathroom who insults Rita after her death, in a fit of pure rage. That kill has nothing to do with the code. Rankin is not a murderer. He is just a rude man in the wrong place at the wrong time. And Dexter, overwhelmed by grief and anger, snaps. The dark passenger takes the wheel, and Harry's voice is drowned out completely. And when Harry's code wins out too strongly, when the rules become more important than common sense, Dexter makes mistakes of a different kind. He delays killing Arthur Mitchell because he is so focused on studying him, so obsessed with the idea that Mitchell might teach him how to have a family and a dark life at the same time. The code says Mitchell deserves to die. Dexter knows Mitchell deserves to die, but he keeps putting it off, and that delay costs Rita her life. This constant war between the three parts of Dexter's mind is what drives the entire series. It is not just a show about a man who kills people. It is a show about a man whose mind is a battlefield. On one side is a force that wants blood and does not care about anything else. On the other side is a set of rules that were installed by a dead man and enforced by a ghost inside Dexter's head. And in the middle is Dexter, trying to hold it all together while living a life that looks normal to everyone around him. There is another layer to this that the show explores brilliantly, and that is the idea of the shadow self. This concept comes from a different thinker, a man named Carl Jung, who believed that every person has a hidden side to themselves, a side that contains all the things they do not want to admit, all the darkness, all the impulses, all the parts of themselves they are ashamed of. Jung called this the shadow, and he believed that the shadow does not go away just because you ignore it. It lives inside you, and the more you deny it, the more power it has over you. The only way to deal with the shadow is to face it, acknowledge it, and find a way to live with it. Dexter's dark passenger is his shadow in the clearest possible terms. It is everything he does not want to be, everything he wishes he could get rid of, everything that separates him from the normal life he desperately wants. And the show's most interesting question is whether Dexter can ever integrate his shadow, whether he can ever find a way to make peace with his darkness and become a whole person, or whether the shadow will always control him. Brian Moser, Dexter's brother, is the most literal version of this shadow. Brian is what Dexter's shadow looks like when it is given a body and set loose in the world. He is the darkness without any of the light. He is the impulse without any of the restraint. When Dexter confronts Brian in Season 1, he is literally confronting his own shadow self. He is looking at the version of himself that has fully surrendered to the darkness, and he has to decide whether to join it or destroy it. He destroys it. He kills Brian. But killing the external shadow does not kill the internal one. The dark passenger remains because it was never really a separate thing. It was always part of Dexter. This is the tragedy at the heart of Dexter Morgan's psychology. He is a man with a three-part mind that is fundamentally at war with itself. The dark urge wants freedom. The code demands control. And the person in the middle is exhausted by the constant negotiation, stretched thin between two forces that can never be fully reconciled. He cannot kill the dark passenger. He cannot abandon the code. And he cannot stop being the man caught between them. Most people experience a version of this war on a much smaller scale. The impulse to eat something you know is bad for you versus the rule that says you should eat healthy. The desire to say something hurtful versus the moral voice that tells you to hold your tongue. The temptation to cut a corner versus the conscience that says to do things right. We all have these internal battles. The difference is that for most of us, the stakes are relatively low. For Dexter, the stakes are life and death, every single time. And nowhere do those stakes become more painfully clear than in Dexter's relationships. Because the three-part war inside his head does not just affect his decisions about killing. It affects everything. It affects how he loves or tries to love. It affects how he connects or fails to connect. It affects how he handles being a husband, a brother, and eventually a father. The dark passenger pulls him away from the people who care about him. The code tells him to keep them at arm's length to stay safe. And the man in the middle, the real Dexter, sometimes reaches out anyway. Not because the rules say he should, but because something inside him, something that might actually be real emotion, tells him to try. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Whether those moments of reaching out are genuine, whether Dexter Morgan is truly capable of loving another person, is one of the most debated questions in the entire series. And it is a question that deserves its own close look. Section 9. Can Dexter love? The emotional evolution of a man who claims he cannot feel. In the very first season of Dexter, the character makes a statement about himself that sets the tone for everything that follows. He says that if he were capable of love, he would have loved Harry. That single line tells you exactly where Dexter starts his journey. He does not believe he can love anyone. He does not believe he has the ability. He considers himself emotionally empty, fundamentally hollow, a person who can imitate the appearance of caring, but who, underneath it all, feels nothing real. And for the first stretch of the series, the show seems to agree with him. Dexter moves through the world like a man behind glass, close enough to see human connection, but unable to touch it. But here is what makes Dexter Morgan one of the most interesting characters ever put on television. The show does not let that statement stand unchallenged. Over the course of 8 seasons, a special event series, and a sequel, the writers slowly and carefully introduce moments that contradict what Dexter believes about himself. Moments where the mask slips, not because he is failing to fake an emotion, but because a real one is breaking through. Moments where Dexter does something that no amount of performance or strategy can explain. And these moments force the viewer, and eventually Dexter himself, to ask whether his self-diagnosis was ever actually correct. Let us start with the relationship that first challenges Dexter's belief that he cannot feel. Rita Bennett. When Dexter starts dating Rita, he is very clear about his reasons, at least in his own head. Rita is useful. She is a single mother, recovering from an abusive marriage with a man named Paul Bennett. She is afraid of physical closeness. She is emotionally fragile. She does not push Dexter for more than he can give, and in return, Dexter gets to look like a normal man with a normal relationship. It is an arrangement, a transaction, a piece of the mask. But something shifts. Slowly, over the first 2 seasons, Dexter's internal thoughts about Rita start to change. He stops talking about her purely in terms of how she serves his cover and starts noticing things about her that have nothing to do with his secret life. He notices her kindness. He notices her strength in dealing with Paul. He notices how good she is with her children, Astor and Cody. And he starts doing things for Rita that go beyond what the mask requires. Protecting her from Paul, standing up for her family, being present in ways that a man who felt nothing would not bother with. When Dexter and Rita get married in the season 3 finale, the show leaves it ambiguous whether Dexter is doing this because he genuinely wants to, or because it is the next logical step in his performance. But the ambiguity is the point. Dexter himself does not know the answer. He cannot tell where the mask ends and something real begins. And that confusion, that inability to distinguish between performed emotion and genuine emotion, is one of the most psychologically honest things the show ever does, because it reflects something real about people who have suffered extreme emotional damage. They often genuinely cannot tell whether what they are feeling is real or not. The wiring is so damaged that the signal gets mixed up on the way from the heart to the brain. And then Rita dies, and everything changes. The season 4 finale is the moment where the question of whether Dexter can feel is answered in the most brutal way possible. When Dexter comes home and finds Rita dead in the bathtub, murdered by Arthur Mitchell, the reaction on his face is not performance. It is not calculation. It is devastation. Pure, raw, unfiltered devastation. He stands in that doorway, and the mask does not just slip. It shatters. And what is left underneath is not the cold, empty void that Dexter has always claimed lives inside him. What is left is pain. Real pain. The kind of pain that only comes from losing someone you actually cared about. The aftermath proves it further. In the first episode of season 5, Dexter spends an entire day completely numb. He cannot fake any emotion at all. He cannot even manage the performance of grief that would be expected of a grieving husband. He is so broken by what has happened that his ability to pretend disappears entirely. And then, in a gas station bathroom, he encounters a rude, aggressive man named Rankin who insults Rita. And Dexter kills him. Not because Rankin is a murderer, not because Rankin fits the code. Dexter kills him in a fit of pure rage and grief. When the image of Harry appears afterward, Harry says something remarkable. He tells Dexter that killing Rankin was the first human thing he has seen Dexter do since Rita's death. Think about what that means. Harry, the man who built the code, the man who spent years teaching Dexter to control his urges, is saying that an impulsive, emotional, code-breaking murder was the most human thing Dexter has done. Because it was driven by real feeling. Not by the dark passenger. Not by a calculated plan. By grief. By love. By the kind of overwhelming emotion that Dexter has spent his entire life claiming he does not have. Rita's death is the turning point. It is the moment the show confirms that Dexter's self-diagnosis was at least partially wrong. He told himself he could not love. But you do not react to someone's death with that level of destruction unless you loved them. Maybe it was not love in the way most people experience it. Maybe it was a different version, a quieter, more confused, less complete version. But it was something. And that something was real. After Rita, Dexter's emotional journey continues to evolve through 2 more significant relationships. The first is with Lumen Pierce in season 5. Lumen is a woman who has been kidnapped and assaulted by a group of men led by Jordan Chase. Dexter rescues her, and, Rather than killing her for witnessing him murder one of her attackers, he helps her. He joins her mission to find and kill the men who hurt her. And during this partnership, something emerges between them. Not a full romantic love story, but a connection based on shared darkness. Lumen understands what it feels like to carry something terrible inside you. And for Dexter, being understood, even partially, is something he has never experienced before. When Lumen leaves at the end of the season, because she no longer feels the dark urge after getting her revenge, Dexter lets her go. And he is genuinely sad. Not devastated like with Rita, but sad in a way that a man who feels nothing would not be. The second relationship is with Hannah McKay, who enters the show in season 7. Hannah is different from every other person in Dexter's life because she is a killer herself. She has taken lives. She understands darkness not as an observer, but as a participant. And she does not judge Dexter for what he is. She does not need him to wear a mask around her. She sees him, the real him, and she is not afraid. For Dexter, this is revolutionary. For the first time in his life, there is someone he does not have to perform for. Someone who knows the worst thing about him and chooses to stay anyway. Dexter falls for Hannah in a way that is clearly different from his relationship with Rita. With Rita, there was always a layer of performance, even when genuine feelings started to develop underneath. With Hannah, the performance drops almost entirely. Dexter is more open with her, more vulnerable, more willing to let his guard down. By the end of season 8, he is willing to throw away his entire life in Miami, his job, his identity, everything, to run away with Hannah and Harrison and start over in Argentina. That is not the behavior of a man who cannot feel. That is the behavior of a man who has finally found someone he wants to build a life with, and who is willing to risk everything to do it. But Dexter does not go to Argentina, because in the final episodes of season 8, the consequences of his double life catch up with him in the worst possible way. Deborah is shot. She survives the initial wound, but suffers complications that leave her in a permanent unconscious state with no chance of recovery. And Dexter, standing at her bedside, makes the most painful decision of his life. He turns off her life support. He carries her body out of the hospital, takes her to his boat, and brings her out to sea. And then he drives his boat directly into a hurricane, apparently killing himself. Except he does not die. He survives and ends up living as a lumberjack in the Pacific Northwest, completely alone, completely cut off from everyone he has ever known. And the final image of the original series is Dexter sitting in a bare room, staring at the camera, with an expression that is impossible to read. Is it emptiness? Is it grief? Is it acceptance? The show does not say. What the show does say, through 8 seasons of evidence, is that Dexter Morgan's claim that he cannot love was wrong. Or at least, it was incomplete. Dexter's capacity for love is not normal. It is not healthy. It is damaged and confused, and expressed in ways that most people would not recognize. But it exists. It shows up in the way he protects Deborah beyond what the code requires. It shows up in the way he grieves Rita beyond what his mask demands. It shows up in the way he opens himself to Hannah in ways that serve no strategic purpose at all. And it shows up most clearly in his relationship with his son, Harrison. Dexter's connection to Harrison is the emotional thread that runs through the later seasons and into New Blood and Resurrection. From the moment Harrison is born, Dexter feels something toward him that he cannot easily explain or categorize. It is protective, fierce, and completely out of proportion to what a man who feels nothing should be capable of. When Harrison is found in Rita's blood, Dexter's horror is not just about the practical implications. It is about the recognition that his son is now facing the same trauma he faced. That the cycle is repeating. And Dexter does not want that for Harrison. He wants something better. He wants his son to have the life he never could.
In Dexter New Blood, when Dexter and Harrison are reunited after years apart, this emotional connection is tested in the hardest way possible. Harrison is angry. He feels abandoned. He has dark urges of his own. And Dexter has to figure out how to be a father to a son who is showing signs of becoming exactly what he is. During this reunion, Dexter tells Harrison something that is perhaps the most emotionally honest thing he has ever said. He tells him that he does not feel love the way other people do. But the way he feels about Harrison is different from the way he feels about anyone else. That line is Dexter finally admitting what the audience has known for seasons. He does feel something. It is not the love you see in movies. It is not the love that comes easily and naturally to people whose emotional development was not destroyed in a shipping container. It is something harder to name, harder to understand, and harder to trust. But it is there, and it is real enough to drive Dexter's choices in ways that the code never could. Dr. Evelyn Vogel noticed this too, back in Season 8. She came to study Dexter expecting a textbook case of someone who could not connect with others. What she found instead was a man who showed loyalty to his sister, protectiveness toward his son, and a capacity for caring that did not fit the profile she expected. Vogel's surprise at what she found in Dexter is the show's way of telling the audience that the labels are not enough. The categories are too small. Dexter Morgan does not fit in a box marked "cannot feel." He exists in a gray area between emptiness and emotion, between performance and sincerity, between the man who says he is a monster and the man who proves again and again that he is something more complicated than that. Whether you call it love or something else, whether you believe it is real or just the most convincing mask Dexter has ever worn, the evidence across the entire series points in one direction. Dexter Morgan can feel. Not the way you or I feel. Not fully, not freely, but enough to grieve, enough to sacrifice, enough to choose another person's well-being over his own survival. And that capacity, limited as it is what makes his story a tragedy rather than just a horror show. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Because Dexter can feel enough to love, but he exists in a world that will never let that love survive. And the reason it will never survive leads to one of the most heartbreaking questions the show asks. If Dexter can feel, if he is not the empty monster he always claimed to be, then was any of this necessary? Was Harry right to assume Dexter could never be fixed? Was the code the only option? Or could things have been different? That question has a name in the world of psychology. It is called the nature versus nurture debate. And in the Dexter universe, it has a face. The face of Brian Moser, the brother who was left behind. Section 10. Nature versus nurture. The Brian Moser question. There is one question that hangs over the entire Dexter series like a shadow that never goes away. It is not about whether Dexter is good or evil. It is not about whether the code works. It is not about whether Dexter can feel. It is simpler than all of those, and at the same time, much harder to answer. The question is this: was Dexter Morgan always going to become what he became? Was the darkness inside him something that was guaranteed from the moment he was born? Something written into his blood and his brain that no amount of love or therapy or intervention could have changed? Or was it created, built by circumstances, by trauma, by the choices other people made on his behalf? Was Dexter born a killer, or was he made into one? This is the oldest debate in all of psychology. Are we shaped by what we are born with, or by what happens to us after we arrive? And the Dexter series gives us the perfect case study to explore it, because it gives us two boys who started in the exact same place and ended up in very different versions of the same darkness. Dexter Morgan and his older brother, Brian Moser. Let us go back to the shipping container one more time.
Both boys were there. Both boys witnessed their mother, Laura Moser, being murdered. Both boys sat in her blood for 2 days waiting to be found. The trauma was identical. The starting point was the same. And when Harry Morgan opened that container, he made a choice that split their lives in 2 completely different directions. He took Dexter and left Brian. Harry has explained his reasoning at various points in the series, through flashbacks, and through the version of himself that appears in Dexter's mind. He said that when he looked at Brian, he saw something in the boy's eyes that told him Brian was already gone, already too damaged, already beyond saving. Whether that assessment was fair or accurate is something the show never fully resolves. Harry was a cop, not a doctor. He was making a snap judgment in the middle of an extremely traumatic scene. But he made it, and both boys lived with the consequences for the rest of their lives. Dexter got Harry. He got a home, a family, a sister in Deborah, a stable environment, and eventually, the code. He got structure, rules, guidance, and a father who, for all his flaws, was deeply invested in keeping him alive and functional. Dexter got someone who saw the darkness in him and decided to manage it rather than ignore it. Brian got nothing. He was placed into the foster care system, where he bounced from home to home with no stability, no guidance, and no one who cared enough to look closely at what was happening inside his head. No one built him a code. No one taught him rules. No one sat him down and explained that if he was going to have these urges, there was a way to channel them that would at least keep him out of prison. Brian was left completely alone with his darkness. And that darkness grew, without any boundaries at all. And both of them became serial killers. That fact alone is significant. It suggests that the trauma in the shipping container was powerful enough to push both boys toward killing, regardless of what happened afterward. The darkness was planted in both of them at the same moment, by the same event. What differed was not whether the darkness existed, but how it was handled. Brian became the ice truck killer. He killed innocent people. He drained their blood and left them posed in public places. He had no moral code, no restrictions, no sense of who deserved to die and who did not. His kills were driven by a need to recreate the feeling of the shipping container, to relive the trauma through blood and death, and to find his brother, the only person alive who shared his experience. When Brian finally reveals himself to Dexter in Season 1, his pitch is simple. We are the same. We were made in the same place, by the same event. The only difference between us is that you had someone to teach you rules. Without those rules, you would be exactly like me. And Dexter knows he is right. That is the most unsettling part. Dexter does not look at Brian and see a stranger. He sees a mirror. He sees the version of himself that exists on the other side of Harry's intervention. And the difference between Dexter and Brian is not talent, not intelligence, not even the depth of their darkness. The difference is one man, Harry Morgan. That is it. One person's involvement changed the entire outcome. This seems like a clear point for the nurture side of the debate. Brian's story suggests that if Dexter had been left in the foster system too, he would have ended up just as unrestrained and just as dangerous. And Dexter's story suggests that with the right guidance, even the deepest darkness can be pointed in a direction that is at least less destructive. Nurture wins, right? The environment made the difference. But the show complicates that reading in several important ways. First, there is the question of whether Harry's intervention actually helped or just changed the shape of the problem. Harry did not cure Dexter. He did not remove the darkness. He did not heal the trauma. He just built a cage around it. The code kept Dexter from killing innocent people, yes, but it also locked him into a life of killing from which he could never escape. It told him, from the time he was a child, that he was permanently broken and that the best he could hope for was controlled destruction. Harry's nurture did not save Dexter from becoming a killer. It just made him a more organized one.
Second, there is the biological angle. The show hints multiple times that there might be something in the Morgan bloodline that goes beyond trauma. Dexter and Brian's biological father, Joe Driscoll, had a murky past. And then there is the fact that both brothers, despite completely different upbringings, both became killers. If nurture was the only factor, you might expect at least one of them to have turned out differently. But they did not. They both ended up in the same dark place. The paths were different, but the destination was the same. That suggests something deeper at work, something that the environment alone cannot explain. And then there is Harrison, Dexter's son, the third generation of this cycle. Harrison witnessed his mother Rita's murder as an infant, just as Dexter witnessed his mother's murder as a toddler. Harrison was found sitting in Rita's blood, just as Dexter was found sitting in Laura's blood. The parallel is deliberate and devastating. And in New Blood, we learn that Harrison has developed dark urges of his own. He has killed. He carries a straight razor, the same type of weapon the Trinity Killer used on his mother. He has the same simmering violence inside him that Dexter recognized in himself. But Harrison is different from both Dexter and Brian in one crucial way. Harrison has a full range of emotions. Unlike Dexter, who grew up feeling hollow and disconnected, Harrison can feel anger, sadness, love, and grief in ways that are messy and intense and very real. He is not emotionally numb. He is not performing feelings the way Dexter does. He actually has them. And yet he still developed the urge to kill. He still carries the darkness. This is the detail that makes the nature versus nurture debate in Dexter so impossible to resolve cleanly. Harrison has emotions that Dexter lacked. He had a different childhood, a different set of circumstances, a different emotional landscape. And he still ended up with the same core problem. The urge is there. The darkness is there, which means that maybe, just maybe, the shipping container did not create the darkness entirely. Maybe it activated something that was already there. Something biological. Something inherited. Something that no amount of love or therapy or codes or rules can fully remove. Season 8 of the original series leans heavily into this idea through the character of Dr. Evelyn Vogel. Vogel is an expert on people with violent tendencies, and she studied Dexter as a child alongside Harry. She helped design the code, and her perspective throughout the season is deeply fatalistic. She believes that people like Dexter are wired the way they are and cannot fundamentally change. She sees Dexter's darkness as biological, as something rooted in his brain structure, something that was either there from birth or permanently embedded by the trauma at such a young age that it might as well have been there from birth. The distinction, in her view, does not matter. The result is the same. Dexter is what he is, and nothing will change that. The final season of the original series seems to agree with Vogel. Dexter ends the show by faking his own death and isolating himself completely. His final internal thought is that he destroys everyone he loves, and he has to protect them from himself. He accepts the idea that he is permanently dangerous, permanently broken, permanently unable to exist alongside the people he cares about without eventually hurting them. He gives in to the fatalistic view. Nature wins. Biology wins. You cannot outrun what you are. But New Blood and Resurrection push back against that conclusion, at least partially. Harrison is proof that the cycle can look different, even if it cannot be stopped entirely. Harrison has darkness, but he also has genuine emotion, genuine connection, a genuine moral sense that Dexter never developed on his own. Harrison might be capable of something Dexter never was. Not escaping the darkness, but living with it in a way that does not require a code imposed from the outside. Harrison might be able to develop real morality,
not installed rules, but the actual felt sense of right and wrong that Dexter lacks.
Or he might not. He might follow the same path.
He might destroy the people around him just as Dexter did. The show, as of its most recent seasons, has not given a final answer. And that might be the most honest thing about it. Because the real nature versus nurture debate does not have a final answer either. The truth, as most people who study the human mind will tell you, is that it is always both. We are shaped by what we are born with and by what happens to us. The two forces interact, blend together, amplify each other. You cannot separate the biology from the environment, any more than you can separate the water from the tea once they have been mixed. Dexter Morgan is the product of both.
He was a boy with a particular biology who experienced a particular trauma at a particular age and was then raised in a particular way by a particular man. Change any one of those variables and you get a different outcome.
Give him Brian's childhood and he becomes Brian. Give Brian Harry's guidance and maybe Brian becomes Dexter. Give Harrison a different father and maybe the cycle breaks. Or maybe it does not. Maybe the darkness is too deep, too rooted, too much a part of who these people are at the most fundamental level. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The show does not pretend to know, and that honesty is what makes the nature versus nurture question in Dexter so powerful. It does not give you a comfortable answer. It gives you a tragedy about a man who was shaped by forces he could not control, and then spent his entire life trying to manage the consequences. And those consequences were not just about killing. They were about something even harder to live with. The constant, exhausting, never-ending experience of believing one thing while doing another. Of holding two completely opposite ideas in your head at the same time, and trying to make them both true. That internal contradiction has a name, and it is the force that slowly tears Dexter Morgan apart from the inside out. Section 11. The contradiction. How Dexter holds two opposite truths at once. There is something that happens inside Dexter Morgan's mind every single day that most people only experience a few times in their entire lives. It is the feeling of holding two completely opposite beliefs at the same time, and somehow convincing yourself that both of them are true. It is uncomfortable. It is exhausting. And over time, it is the thing that slowly tears him apart. Dexter believes he is a monster. He says it over and over again throughout the series. He calls himself a monster in his internal thoughts. He tells his victims he is a monster. He tells the image of Harry in his head that he is a monster. He looks in the mirror and sees something inhuman staring back. This is not false modesty. Dexter genuinely believes he is fundamentally different from regular people, that something inside him is broken beyond repair, and that the best he can do is point that brokenness in a useful direction. But at the same time, Dexter believes he is doing good. He believes that by killing murderers who have escaped justice, he is making the world safer. He believes the code gives his kills a moral purpose. He believes that every person he puts on his table is someone who would have gone on to hurt more innocent people if Dexter had not stopped them. He takes pride in this. He finds meaning in it. When he completes a kill that fits the code perfectly, he feels not just relief from the dark passenger, but a sense of righteousness. He did the right thing. He removed a threat. He served justice where the system failed. Monster and hero, killer and protector. These two beliefs live side by side inside Dexter's head, and they contradict each other completely. You cannot be a monster and a force for good at the same time. You cannot call yourself inhuman and then claim your actions serve humanity. The two ideas cancel each other out, and yet Dexter holds on to both of them with equal force. Because letting go of either one would destroy the only version of himself he knows how to be. If Dexter admits he is only a monster, then the code means nothing.
The rules Harry gave him are just a leash on a dangerous animal, not a moral framework. Every kill he has ever made becomes just another murder, no different from the crimes committed by the people on his table. And Dexter cannot live with that. He needs the code to mean something. He needs to believe that what he does matters, that he is different from Brian, different from the Trinity Killer, different from every other serial killer he has encountered. Without that belief, he is just a man who enjoys killing people. And that truth is too ugly to face. But if Dexter admits he is truly doing good, then he has to accept that he has real morality, real feelings, real humanity. And that contradicts everything else he believes about himself. That contradicts the hollow emptiness he claims to feel. That contradicts his belief that he is fundamentally broken. If he is truly capable of moral action, then maybe he is also truly capable of love, of connection, of being a real person. And if that is true, then maybe the code was never necessary. Maybe Harry was wrong. Maybe Dexter could have been helped in a different way. Maybe everything he has done, all the killing, all the plastic, all the blood slides, was avoidable. And that thought is even more terrifying than the first one, because it means that over 100 people are dead, not because Dexter had no choice, but because he was never given a better option. So Dexter holds on to both beliefs simultaneously. I am a monster. I am doing good. He needs both to survive, and the constant friction between them creates a pressure inside him that shows up in nearly every major decision he makes throughout the series. You can see it in how he handles the people closest to him. Dexter genuinely wants to protect Deborah, Rita, Harrison, and the few people he seems to actually care about. But he also continuously puts them in danger by keeping them close to his secret life. He tells himself he is protecting them by keeping his secret hidden. But the truth is that by staying in their lives at all, he is exposing them to the risk of everything falling apart. Rita dies because Dexter's obsession with studying Arthur Mitchell delays the kill long enough for Mitchell to discover Dexter's real identity and retaliate. Deborah's entire life is destroyed when she discovers Dexter's secret, eventually leading her to kill Captain Maria LaGuerta to protect him, an act that shatters her psychologically and contributes to the chain of events that ends with her death. Harrison grows up without a father because Dexter abandons him, believing it is safer for Harrison to be far away from him. Every one of these outcomes is a direct result of Dexter's internal contradiction. He believes he is dangerous, and he is right. But he also believes he can manage that danger well enough to keep the people he cares about safe. And he is wrong. Every season proves him wrong. The people around him keep getting hurt, keep getting damaged, keep paying the price for Dexter's inability to accept that both of his beliefs cannot be true at the same time. The contradiction also shows up in how Dexter relates to his own kills. There are moments throughout the series where Dexter kills someone who fits the code perfectly, and afterward he feels satisfied, justified, even righteous. But there are other moments where the line is not so clean, where the kill is driven less by the code and more by personal emotion, personal revenge, personal need. And in those moments, Dexter has to work overtime to convince himself that the kill was still justified. The clearest example of this internal friction comes when Dexter accidentally kills an innocent man. Jonathan Farrow is a photographer who Dexter suspects of being a murderer. He goes through his process, gathers what he believes is evidence, and puts Farrow on his table. He kills him. And then, afterward, he discovers that Farrow was not actually a killer. The evidence was wrong. Dexter murdered an innocent person. This moment should, by the logic of the code, destroy Dexter. The single most important rule Harry gave him, the rule that separates him from every other serial killer, is never kill an innocent. And he has just broken it. The entire foundation of his self-image, the belief that he is a different kind of killer, a better kind of killer,
cracks under the weight of that failure. Dexter feels guilt, real guilt.
He is shaken and disturbed in a way that goes beyond what the mask would require.
He did not fake this reaction. He actually feels terrible about what he did. But here is what is so revealing about what happens next. Dexter does not stop killing.
He does not throw away the code.
He does not turn himself in. He processes the guilt, absorbs the shock, and eventually moves on. He tells himself it was a mistake, an exception, a one-time failure in an otherwise reliable system.
And he goes right back to killing people who fit the code, as if the Pharaoh incident was a bump in the road, rather than proof that his entire system is flawed.
This is how the internal contradiction sustains itself.
Every time evidence appears that should force Dexter to confront the truth,
he finds a way to absorb it without changing. He bends his beliefs just enough to accommodate the new information, then snaps back to his default position.
I am a monster who does good. The code works.
I am in control, even when the evidence says otherwise. But the contradiction cannot hold forever, and in the final stretch of the story, it finally collapses.
In Dexter New Blood,
the internal contradiction reaches its breaking point. Dexter has been living in Iron Lake, New York, under the name Jim Lindsay, staying clean for almost a decade.
But when he starts killing again,
the old patterns come back, and with them, the old contradictions. He tells himself he is still following the code. He tells himself he is still doing good. But the cracks are wider now.
The justifications are thinner.
And then he kills Logan. Sergeant Logan is not a murderer. He is not a criminal. He is a good man, a police officer, a friend of Dexter's ex-girlfriend, Angela Bishop.
Dexter kills him while trying to escape from a jail cell.
It is not planned. It is not part of the ritual. It is a desperate, ugly act committed by a man who wants to survive at any cost. And it violates the code in the most fundamental way possible.
What happens after Logan's death is the moment the contradiction finally shatters.
Dexter tries to justify it. He tries to explain to Harrison why it was necessary, why he had no choice, why it does not change who he is.
But Harrison is not buying it.
Harrison looks at his father and sees what Dexter has been refusing to see for his entire life. He sees a man who kills people, not a hero, not a force for justice, not a monster with a moral code,
just a man who kills people and finds ways to live with it afterward.
And in that moment, Dexter sees it too. For the first time, standing in front of his son, he cannot maintain both beliefs at once. He cannot be the monster and the hero.
He cannot be the danger and the protector.
He has to choose. And the choice he makes is devastating. He accepts that he fits his own code. He accepts that by the rules Harry gave him, he himself deserves to die. He tells Harrison it is okay, and Harrison shoots him. That moment is the final collapse of a contradiction that Dexter carried for over 20 years. Two opposite beliefs, held together by sheer willpower and self-deception, finally pulling apart with enough force to end his life. Or so it seems. Because Dexter survives that gunshot. He wakes up in a hospital in the first episode of Dexter Resurrection. And suddenly, the question that the entire series has been building toward is back on the table. If the contradiction destroyed him once and he survived, what happens next? Does he rebuild the same lie? Does he find a new way to live with the darkness? Or has something fundamentally changed? Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The answer to that question ties into the deepest and most universal theme the show has ever explored. A theme about meaning, about purpose, about what a person does when they have been stripped of every story they ever told themselves about who they are. And it is the final piece of Dexter Morgan's psychological puzzle. Section 12. The Search for Meaning.
What was it all for? After everything we have talked about in this essay, after the trauma and the code and the dark passenger and the mask and the kills and the contradictions and the relationships that kept breaking under the weight of Dexter's double life, there is one question left, the biggest one. The one that every single thread we have pulled eventually leads back to. What was the point? What was Dexter Morgan living for? What kept him going, day after day, year after year, through a life that was built on lies and held together with plastic wrap? What was he searching for? The answer changes depending on which part of the series you are watching. And that change, that evolution, is the final and maybe most important piece of Dexter Morgan's psychology. In the beginning, Dexter is not searching for anything. He is surviving. That is it. The first season presents a man who has no real sense of purpose beyond satisfying the dark passenger and not getting caught. He goes to work. He performs his role. He follows the code. He kills when the need rises. And then he does it all again. There is no bigger picture. There is no grand plan. Dexter exists in a cycle, and the cycle is the point. He does not ask why he is alive. He does not wonder what it all means. He simply continues, like a machine running a program that someone else wrote for him. This is the emptiest version of Dexter, the version that is closest to the monster he claims to be. And if the show had stayed here, Dexter would have been a fascinating but ultimately flat character. A man defined entirely by what he does, rather than by what he wants. But the show does not stay here. It pushes Dexter forward, whether he likes it or not, into territory that forces him to confront the question of meaning. The first push comes from Rita and her children. When Dexter starts spending time with Aster and Cody, something shifts in him that he did not expect. He finds himself interested in them, engaged by them. He describes children as more interesting than adults, and his interactions with Aster and Cody feel less forced than almost anything else in his social life. When he steps into the role of stepfather, and later when Harrison is born, Dexter encounters something new. Responsibility that is not about the code. Purpose that is not about killing. A reason to be in the world that has nothing to do with the dark passenger. This is where the show begins exploring the idea that meaning might come from connection rather than from violence. Dexter has spent his entire life believing that killing is the only thing that makes him feel alive. But fatherhood offers a competing source of meaning. It gives him something to protect, something to build, something that exists outside the darkness. And for a while, especially during season 4, when he is trying to balance family life with hunting the Trinity Killer, Dexter genuinely seems to be reaching toward a life where meaning comes from love rather than from death. But the Trinity Killer destroys that possibility. Rita's murder proves, in the most devastating way possible, that Dexter cannot have both. He cannot be a father and a killer. He cannot build a family and maintain a secret life. The two worlds are incompatible, and when they collide, the people Dexter cares about are the ones who pay. After Rita's death, the search for meaning through family takes a massive hit. Dexter does not stop caring about Harrison, but he pulls back. He becomes more guarded, more isolated, more convinced that closeness leads to destruction. The later seasons see Dexter searching for meaning in different places. In season 5, he finds a temporary sense of purpose through his partnership with Lumen Pierce. Helping her get revenge against the men who hurt her gives Dexter a mission that feels cleaner than his usual kills. He is not just satisfying the dark passenger. He is helping someone heal. And for those few episodes, Dexter seems lighter, more engaged, more present than he has been in a long time. But Lumen leaves when her darkness fades, and Dexter is alone again. In seasons 7 and 8, he searches for meaning through his relationship with Hannah McKay.
Hannah represents the possibility of being fully known and fully accepted.
She is the one person who sees all of Dexter, the killer and the man, and does not run away.
With Hannah, Dexter imagines a future. Argentina, a new life, a fresh start where he does not have to hide.
This is the most hopeful Dexter has ever been about his own existence.
For the first time, he believes that meaning might come from being truly seen by another person. But again, the show does not let him have it. Deborah is shot.
She falls into a permanent unconscious state. And Dexter, facing the wreckage of everything his double life has caused, makes the decision to let her go. He turns off her life support, takes her body to sea, and then drives his boat into a hurricane. In that moment, Dexter has given up on finding meaning entirely.
He has decided that his existence causes too much pain to the people around him, and that the most meaningful thing he can do is remove himself from their lives permanently.
The original series ends with Dexter alive, but completely alone.
Living as a lumberjack in the Pacific Northwest. No family, no friends, no code, no kills, no dark passenger being fed. Just existence. Bare, empty, purposeless existence.
He stares into the camera in the final shot with an expression that suggests he has not found peace.
He has just found a way to stop causing damage. And the difference between those two things is enormous.
This is the darkest answer to the question of meaning that the show offers.
Maybe there is no meaning for someone like Dexter. Maybe the best a person this damaged can hope for is to minimize the harm they cause.
Not to find purpose or love or redemption,
but simply to stop hurting people. That is not meaning. That is surrender. But the story does not end there.
Because Dexter survives Harrison's gunshot in New Blood and wakes up in a hospital bed at the start of Resurrection.
And suddenly, for the first time in the entire series, Dexter is in a completely new situation. He has been stripped of everything.
His identity has been exposed.
His son shot him. His mask is gone. The code has been shattered by his own violations. The dark passenger, while still present, no longer has the same hold on him that it once did.
Dexter Morgan is, for the first time in his life, starting from nothing.
And this is where the search for meaning takes its most interesting turn. In Resurrection, Dexter is physically weakened from the gunshot.
He is no longer the unstoppable, meticulous predator he once was.
He moves to New York. He takes a job as a rideshare driver.
And he goes looking for Harrison.
Not to train him or mold him or turn him into another version of himself, but to protect him, to be there for him, to do the thing he failed to do before. Something has changed in Dexter. Something subtle but real.
In the original series, Dexter's kills always came first.
The dark passenger's needs always took priority over everything else. But in Resurrection, there is a moment that has never happened before in the entire history of the character.
Dexter has a killer on his table.
A man named Oliver Saxon's equivalent. Someone who fits the code. Someone who deserves it by every standard Harry ever set. And Dexter lets him go. Not because the evidence is wrong.
Not because someone interrupted him.
But because there is a victim who needs saving. And Dexter chooses to save the victim instead of completing the kill. The image of Harry in Dexter's mind points this out.
He tells Dexter that he has never done this before.
He has never prioritized saving someone over killing someone. And this is true.
Across 8 seasons of the original show,
across New Blood, across every kill Dexter has ever made, he has never once chosen rescue over ritual. Until now.
This moment is small in terms of screen time,
but massive in terms of what it means for Dexter's psychology.
It suggests that after decades of searching,
after losing Rita, after losing Deborah, after being shot by his own son, after being stripped of his identity and his strength and his certainty, Dexter may have finally stumbled onto something that feels
like genuine meaning. Not the meaning that comes from killing. Not the meaning that comes from the code. Not even the meaning that comes from being loved or accepted, but the meaning that comes from choosing, freely and without obligation, to put another person's life above your own darkness. Whether this change will last, whether Dexter can sustain it, whether the dark passenger will eventually drag him back to where he started, that remains to be seen. The show is still telling this story. But the fact that Dexter Morgan, after everything he has been through, after every person he has lost, after every lie he has told and every life he has taken, is still capable of growth, still capable of choosing differently, still capable of surprising even the ghost of his own father. That says something important. It says that maybe Dexter was wrong about himself all along. Not about the darkness. The darkness is real. It will always be real. But about the idea that the darkness is all there is. About the belief that he is nothing more than a monster managing his symptoms. About the conviction that meaning, for someone like him, is impossible. Dexter Morgan has spent his entire life believing he was hollow inside, believing he was empty, believing that the only thing that could fill that emptiness was blood and ritual and the temporary relief of a kill. But the evidence, scattered across decades of his life, tells a different story. The grief he felt for Rita, the loyalty he showed Deborah, the love he could not quite name for Harrison, the choice he made to save a stranger instead of satisfying the dark passenger. All of it points to the same conclusion. Dexter Morgan is not empty. He never was. He is a man with a broken container, and the feelings keep leaking out in ways he cannot predict or control. But they are there. They have always been there. Buried under the trauma, hidden behind the mask, denied by the man himself, but present, real, human. And that might be the most unsettling truth of all. Not that Dexter Morgan is a monster pretending to be human, but that he is a human who convinced himself he was a monster, and he spent his whole life living down to that belief, when something better might have been possible all along. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.